What's that? Okay. So let's get the Nantucket Conservation Commission meeting going here for December 14th, 2016. We are recording the meeting, and if anybody is recording, please let us know. And if you could silence your cell phones, it would be highly appreciated. So the public meeting, public comment. Then comments from anyone who has anything to do with items not on the board tonight. Okay.
Hi, gentlemen. Probably getting tired of seeing me.
Never.
Could you give us your name, please?
This is just the beginning.
Could you give us the name, please, for the record?
Steve Bender.
Steve Bender, thanks.
73 Orange Street. 1995, the boat basin wished to do an amount of repairs and changes and so forth on their buildings, on their piers and so forth, so forth. And of course they went in front of the DEP and they had Earth Tech draw up a big plan, and the result of this was a Chapter 91 amnesty license, which they received. And the reason I'm here, I'm running ahead of myself, is the agency that that watches that such licenses are are taken care of is the Conservation Commission. I didn't realize this, but I'm going to read you this. This is special condition number 10. The reason I'm here is that none of these things that were supposed to be done, like putting oil-absorbing pillows in storm drains, cleaning out the storm drains, etc., essentially 14 of them in the A&B parking lot, has never been done. It's 21 years, right? Okay. They are now, you know, if you watch TV or you go to the selectmen's meeting 3 or 4 weeks ago, Dave Fredericks got up and gave a big presentation. They want to do a real major change down there where the parking lot is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. You know, we should special condition number 10, this is from a 2009, we couldn't find the 1995, but Jeffrey had an order into the state. We're going to get it soon. But this is a re-rendition of the 1995 conditions. Special condition number 10. The licensee is the boat basin, Nantucket. This was before the Nantucket Island resorts took it over. The licensee shall, as part of a regular maintenance regime, inspect all catch basins on the project site at intervals not to exceed 6 months in order to monitor their proper function. Sediment traps shall be cleaned as necessary within 90 days of license issuance. The licensee shall install and maintain in good working order sorbent pillows in all the catch basins in the parking lot adjacent to Building G. That's the A&B building now. It's the Stop and Shop building, as shown on the license plan. The licensee shall monitor the condition of these catch basins by conducting field inspections at least every 2 months. Sorbent pillows shall be replaced as necessary based on the determination of the Conservation Commission or its designee. Inspections of all catch basins and any remedial action taken shall be documented in an inspection log by the licensee and submitted to the Nantucket Conservation Commission upon request of said commission. Okay, what I'm saying is that I called the DEP today, and I said, now what's going on here? None of this has been done. And he said, well, the Conservation Commission, if you read it, are the people whose charge by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is to protect the waters. And of course, the Chapter 91 amnesty license, I just read you that. Okay. What more can I say? You guys got to get going. Nothing of this has been done. The harbor is dying. There's almost no scallops. I have an oyster farm doing very well. My prognostication is not good. The oxygen level is going down, down, down as the algae proliferate. I came before you about the possibility that the chemicals used in the cranberry bog might be harming the eelgrass. I came before you and said that there is massive gray water pollution emanating from the boat basin. Possibly thousands of gallons a day, possibly tens of thousands of gallons a day. And now, I did a little research. I remember reading this in '95, and I've been wondering why isn't any of this happening. And it's only recently come to my attention over the past year that the agency that has to take care of these things is indeed the Conservation Commission. These papers and so forth, Jeff, we'll distribute to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Is anything, are we moving forward with the
You
meeting?
can ask me any questions, excuse me, if there are any. I'm happy to answer.
Are
Yeah,
we,
I've got a question, Steve.
Yes.
Have you done any monitoring at all of oxygen levels?
Have I done?
Yeah,
No, I don't do any monitoring.
okay.
I just blab.
Lab away anytime.
I just finished reading the 1997 report from Woods Hole on the condition of the harbor, 97. And that was an addendum to the 95 study, which was 5 years, which was a big study. The 97 study was particularly pointed at the oxygen. And in 1997, this report is available in the library. They noticed that the oxygen level in the upper harbor was sort of hanging between being inadequate and adequate. In other words, it was being compromised. That 1997, it's almost, what? It's almost 20 years. It's almost 20 years ago. The amount of nitrates, the algae bloom and so forth have only increased. So the oxygen level must be much less now. And in fact, we had a big die-off. I say we, it wasn't me, because my oyster farm isn't out there in the middle. They had a big die-off this summer of their seed oysters. I mean, tens of thousands of, in fact, Matt Hurd told me all his seed oysters died. And the biologists, they're not sure exactly why, but it's a combination, probably, of algae and lack of oxygen.
So, whose oysters were this?
Matt Hurd lost all of them, his.
Matt.
Matt Hurd, H-E-R-R, the husband of the Nantucket, what is Tara? What's her title? She's the shellfish biologist, yes.
we talked about having a meeting with the boat basin folks and the selectmen.
I think if you guys want, an easy way to start that is, part of that condition includes the providing of maintenance logs upon your request. I think it's pretty simple to request those logs and request demonstration that they're in compliance with it with a set time period that's there. And then it's just a matter of even including in that request that you expect that every 2 months a work log be filed with the commission to kind of monitor going forward. But it's a condition that, to be perfectly honest, I haven't seen in really any other Chapter 91 licenses that they defer enforcement to non-com. But we'll certainly look into it too, because that's, I have another one that kind of snuck through. So I guess that would be my recommendation to start, is to say, please file these in compliance with your license, demonstrate the work that needs to be done, demonstrate that you're in compliance. If you're not in compliance, your maintenance logs of these areas on a 2-month cycle in perpetuity.
Okay.
And then kind of start from there.
Mr. Chairman, there's also no mandatory dye requirement, is there, at the moment?
Are you talking the Great Water
Yeah.
issue?
Somebody brought to my attention that there's at least one Hinkley sloop out there that is on Airbnb. And so my guess is that whoever arrives from anywhere,
Well, that's the assumption it's not having a whole tank, too.
excuse me?
That's the assumption it doesn't have a holding tank either.
Well, but I
Yeah,
guess
I know.
the point is that shouldn't we be asking, shouldn't we put our weight behind having mandatory dye requirements for all the vessels that come into the harbor?
Well, it seems to me we have to have a meeting with the selectmen and come up with a whole bunch of,
Yeah, if you wanted to
Issues
require
like that
that
as
would
well.
probably be something that would most appropriately be within the, the slip and mooring regulations. That if you were more within the harbor, that you would be required to put in a dye tablet or
Yeah.
seal those, and you just have to set up a mechanism to be able to provide those tablets. It's only a cost.
yeah, I mean, it does seem like a good idea.
But
Um,
I think that may be something that, to move that forward somewhat, I think this issue with the Chapter 91 compliance is independent of that.
Right.
But I think Ian's point of those dye tablets would be something that, frankly, the start of that discussion would probably be with the Board of Health first, and maybe to some degree with the Harbor Master and Board of Selectmen as well.
Right.
But it certainly is something. I mean, we've been involved in the letter writing campaign lately. We can always do one to all three of those agencies that's been brought to our attention, and that this is something that we feel is important to do, and we would like to move forward with everyone. We certainly draft something that way up for the next meeting,
Okay.
which will go with the board.
So do we need to take a vote on making a motion on the,
Yeah, one of the actual commission members needs to
Make-
make a
right.
motion to take an action.
would someone like to do that?
Yeah, move that we, first motion would be that we approach the Board of Selectmen to deal with gray water issues from boats moored in the harbor. And that we meet with them to discuss those issues. And then
Yeah.
Jeff could contact.
Well, I think the best way to put it, because it wasn't on the agenda specifically, would be to draft a letter to those concerns for discussion at the next hearing and issuing it. So
Okay.
it would come out then, so that would be a posted agenda item that you guys took issue to issue that letter. So now you would just be essentially moving to draft it and then send it. The other one, the compliance issue is something that you could move to take action if you have that ability or granted to you, right?
Right. So monitoring reports, yeah. So if you want to, we could add that in that same
Yeah,
motion.
so, as Jeff said, so moved.
Okay. Do I have a second?
So the kind of a twofold, that the first one is that they're moving to draft a letter to be discussed at the next hearing to approach the Board of Selectmen and Board of Health about gray water management within, I guess within Nantucket and Paddock harbors, close there too. And then the second part of that motion is to issue a letter to the Nantucket Boat Basin requesting the maintenance logs and records in conjunction with their Chapter 91 licensing for the slip and dockage and parking lot facility.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so that's the motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay.
So it'll be.
Okay. Any other questions concerning Steve's point? Okay.
We do have another piece of public comment.
Sure.
Rachel Freeman, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Nantucket Land Bank, and I just wanted to update the commission as to where we were at with our most recent enforcement order pertaining to 175 Pulpus Road. And the enforcement order had a requirement of having a restoration plan complete by December 14th, which is today. So I thought I'd let you know exactly what we have done. We haven't been able to get that far yet, but the homeowner did reach out to us after the article in the paper, which was fantastic, and offered to pay for the restoration in full. So we've hired Jeff Blackwell to do the survey work because he's done work in the area, and we're getting bids from 3 different landscapers who have been recommended to do native restorations on the island, and that's where we're at. And the owner's been sent a letter, and we discussed it with our lawyer about how to make him commit, and he's agreed to commit, and we have somebody on board who's willing to enforce that if that doesn't happen.
Great.
So I can submit all the paperwork and the letters and the contracts, but I just wanted to let you guys know where we're at. And we expect to be coming in with the restoration plan by the end of January. Oh,
Thank you. Thank you.
Sounds like a good
it's
bit
good.
of movement there.
Yes.
Simple.
Good.
It's amazing what happens when these hit the meeting.
Newspaper's great. Okay. Any more public comment? Okay. So going to the public hearing, notices of intent. We have a couple continuances here. We have the Nantucket Island Land Bank, 17 Commercial Wharf, and unnumbered lot, New Whale Street. It's continued till January 18th. And we have Sunset House LLC, 15 Hollowell Lane, is continued till January 4th. And Fargo Way Realty Trust and Wawanit Realty Trust, 10 Fargo Way, is continued till January 18th as well. So we are going to start with, did I miss one here? Oh, I did miss one here. No, I didn't. Okay. Medalone, 14 Western Ave.
Don Bracken, Engineering, representing the applicant. We have not heard back from Natural Heritage as of today, so don't expect to close the meeting tonight. The project is basically broken down into 2 separate projects. The first section would be the upgrade of the existing septic system. The site is on the southerly side of Western Ave. Resource areas on the site include coastal dune and coastal bank, according to the local definition for coastal bank. There is a flood zone on the site, but it's much further to the south. It's a V zone, falls within the coastal dune. Currently, the site has a septic tank and 2 leaching pits in the dune, seaward of the bottom of the coastal bank. I don't know if you can see it on your plans. It's sort of on the kind of lightly faded back. The plan for the septic system is to keep the existing septic tank, abandon the 2 leaching pits, which are too close to the groundwater, and install a current Title V septic system meeting groundwater separation requirements. We highlighted the limit of work area anticipated in order to replace the septic system. That was all part of the submission to Natural Heritage. This isn't exempt, even though it's a septic system upgrade, because of the amount of disturbance that it's going to require to get down there and replace the system. We are proposing to revegetate all disturbed areas with American beach grass, 12 inches on center. There won't be any grade changes for the septic system. We did do a soil boring and have groundwater elevation, so we're comfortable with maintaining the existing grades that are there. So the septic system requires a few waivers from the local regulations. The first obvious one is that no septic systems are allowed in coastal dune. Unfortunately, in this case, in several of the lots in this area, these lots are all serviced by individual wells that are located to the front of the lot in order to meet the minimum 100-foot setback. That's why the septic systems originally were put in the dune. And that's pretty much the only alternative we have for replacing the septic system. That being said, it will be an improvement over what is there. As I said, the leaching pits are close to the groundwater, and this type of system provides better treatment than the leaching pits would. The other waiver would be more technicality. The distance from a coastal bank will be 35 feet rather than 100 feet. So we're asking for those two waivers for the septic system. Second portion of the project consists of renovations of the existing dwelling itself. The major renovation aspect would be to construct a full foundation under the existing house, which currently has a crawl space. With that, we were proposing a walk-down stairwell located behind the garage. The garage will remain as it is. The foundation system for that will also remain. We're also proposing 2 window wells on the western side of the house to go along with the full foundation. The work falls all within the 50-foot buffer to the coastal bank, and a portion of it falls within the 25-foot buffer. The closest point to the coastal bank is 15 feet to the proposed stairwell. And in that location, it's currently a lawn area and occupied area. There are no natural buffers currently for the 25-foot buffer from the coastal bank. You can see by the plan, the top of the coastal bank is delineated by an existing retaining wall, and up to that wall is a lawn area. So we're not proposing any disturbance, obviously, of any naturally vegetated areas to that coastal bank. The porch and deck areas on that side of the house will be replaced based on the age and the condition, but we're proposing to replace those in the same footprint. Also proposing a dry-laid patio on the southeast corner of the property, of the structure, in that same vicinity where the proposed stairway is located, going down to the basement. Again, several waivers are required that are highlighted in the notice of intent, that being the 25-foot natural no disturb buffer. We're asking for that waiver because there currently is no natural area. And the setback to the structure won't be increased for the majority of the full basement, except for the area where the proposed stairwell is located. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
How are you going to get down there? How are you going to for the septic field?
We're showing this path
Oh.
right here. So I was out there and took a look. This is going to be the
Open mass.
easiest path to get down on the east side.
So will they need to deconstruct the garage to do that?
No.
It's tight. Well, on the
It
property
is
line.
tight. There's a hedge there. There's almost 12 feet to the property line.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're gonna probably have to remove that hedge to get down there. And the other thing is, with this type of system, these are plastic chambers, they could probably get down there with a small machine. They don't need a large excavator to do work.
Oh, these like the infiltrator cone.
Exactly, yeah. So it's,
So this is a simple Title V system, there's no advanced nitrogen or any removal?
no, and we looked at that, we looked at the properties on each side of us, and they were done within the last 10 years or so, and they didn't have IA systems. I think I talked to Jeff about that to see what he would recommend, and I think based on what's been done in the past in these situations.
So this area, just to kind of elaborate on that, is something that the health director, Roberto Santamaria, and I talked about a little bit. This area is kind of similar to the Codfish Park area. I mean, this is obviously all in resource area. That area isn't totally in resource area, but none of these areas are deemed nitrogen-sensitive areas because all of the groundwater flow is going out to the ocean. So it's not something that the Board of Health has been typically requiring an IA component for, as long as you can get a traditional system there. In situations with groundwater issues and things, they've had other ones where they've still required an IA component, but this is not something that they would require as part of the Board of Health permit. The beach we're going to Nantucket Harbor would be a totally
Totally different situation.
Right.
Yeah.
alternative to the septic system. You have the well in front still. That's 100
Right.
feet, you're saying, Don.
Mhm.
And this is based on a net benefit analysis. No other access to get down there.
Yeah.
So,
Basically, it's like 500 or 600 feet from the ocean.
yeah, it goes
And-
much further than that. There's a lot of accretion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a large beach area.
And a very stable dune system. In
Yeah.
Vegetation. So is this all dune? There's not like a underlying moraine or
No.
or anything?
Yeah, I don't believe so. I did a soil boring with the Board of Health down about 10 feet, and it was just all dune, so
All
we
dune,
never
so
encountered
all
encountered anything else, no resistance.
I've got to say, the full basement is a little concerning for me, given the location at the top of the bank.
Well, the building code does have setbacks from slopes like this, which I believe is 50 feet, or in the alternative, you can submit a geotech report to confirm the stability of the bank to go to whatever the proposed depth is. So I would expect that to be required as part of the building permit application. Unfortunately, there's no place else to put the stairwell because of the zoning setbacks.
But you
Yeah, we
wouldn't
couldn't
need
put it on
a
the side.
stairwell if you didn't have a basement?
That's correct.
Well, can we take this in parts? Why don't we talk about the septic system first, if we could?
I tend to agree with the non-IA. We have a lot out on the surf side on ocean, with the groundwater flowing out to the ocean, as opposed to a harbor. Personally. So,
Well, I mean, the well could be moved. And the septic
well, you might probably have a neighbor's well too. I mean, these are small width lots, probably. Yeah.
That doesn't actually show. in
No,
there.
it doesn't show this.
Oh, it does. And actually, yeah,
Yeah.
the neighbor to the east, their septic system was in the back, but they moved it to the front and put the well in the back. The other, the other danger to putting the well in the dune is going to be the groundwater quality and saltwater intrusion. So, and I don't,
Well, you're talking about 100 feet difference, or, which I'm not sure that would have much of a bearing.
Yeah, I was thinking
I'm
the
not
same thing.
actually advocating doing it.
Mhm.
I'm just saying that
Yeah.
that is an alternative.
It is an alternative.
And it's sort of a fait accompli since you've got the old septic system.
Hmm. Other
Well, I don't
thoughts?
see much alternative for
Definitely with the location, yeah. Yeah.
but the basement is another question.
Well, it is a valid point, the basement on that bank.
I also would like to know, and I guess Carrie will answer this, because it's not just beach grass, there are some like unique species and things on that bank. So if it is more of a mixed species up there, then maybe we'd want to replant with more of a mix than just beach grass.
this area is kind of sparse on that side, but we can take a look at it and maybe have some information back at the next meeting.
To be perfectly fair, my guess from the start, this area is probably meant for heritage, for boulders and terns, because they're
think
present
so.
on the beach side on this property, or they've been there before. That's my, there could be a plant, for sure, but typically the wetland protection has wildlife both plants.
But yeah, that whole area kind of down on that dune system does tend to be a fairly old dune system that is not just simply beach grass in general. I mean, I haven't looked at this site, but
Yeah, I walk, not here, but further down, and it's a pretty diverse dune. I feel like there's some Artemisia in there, a lot of,
beach pea and
yeah.
I mean, obviously, this the house wouldn't be there under today's regulations no
Right.
matter what. And the way we're looking at it, we are asking for an expansion of the footprint for that stairwell, but we don't see what the negative impact is going to be for it, where the area has already been disturbed and used.
Yeah, I get the feeling the stairwell's not so much the issue as the whole potential instability of a full 8 foot.
What's the house on now? Just a
Crawl space.
Yeah, so it's down 4, well, 3 or 4.
If we're talking about, I don't know exactly how water flows, but if we put a big house foundation in there, it's gonna impact through that property, through the dune area.
Well, we do have groundwater elevation at 1.7 from the boring that we did. And the ground elevation is up at 24 where the
So you
foundation
won't
is. So
be near
even at 10 feet, we're at elevation 14,
Yeah, you're
Some
below,
footing,
you're
so-
above the,
substantially above groundwater.
Yeah, quite a bit.
And it is a stable, I mean, the bank is far enough back from the ocean that it's, at least presently, and it's got a wall there, a retaining wall as well, so it is fairly stable, but those dune systems don't hold up if there's,
No, they're fragile.
yeah, they're very
And
fragile.
we're gonna be digging in front of it, most likely to put septic in.
Septic.
So that's gonna destabilize what we're considering stable, most likely. Because we're gonna drive our machines right in front of it.
I think, well, I mean, the weight of the machine, I gave you that information, it's not going to be substantial, and the septic system's only going to be a few feet deep.
right.
It's, almost 40 feet from the bottom of the bank, so
No,
I can't imagine there's going to be any impact from the septic system on the bank.
What is there now for a system?
1,000-gallon septic tank with a distribution box and 2 leaching pits.
Yeah. Did it fail the,
They're dry, but they're
Yeah.
too close to the groundwater.
okay. Okay, so that has to be done anyway, so there really isn't an option there. And maybe net benefit would be outweigh that. So. Awesome.
Enough for nothing, but just to kind of to summarize for everybody, I mean, we have to continue for 2 weeks.
Right,
for
go look at it.
Heritage. I mean, to me, it sounds like you guys are requesting some sort of analysis from the applicant that the foundation won't destabilize the bank. And from the applicant's description, that's something at some point they're gonna have to provide anyway. So I don't see that it's unreasonable to just kind of collect some thoughts and figure that out. We're
Yeah,
not
be-
having to wait for 2 weeks
And
anyway.
also vegetation composition.
Yeah, we
areas
take a
that's
look
gonna be
into that.
disturbed.
Right, and where else are we allowing basements being put in within 25 feet of the top of a bank?
Constable. What's this?
We're letting full basements be put in
They're
within
putting full
25
basements in a
feet?
bunch of those houses.
Maybe not within 25, but at least.
Right.
It's pretty close.
Right,
Within
but I
50.
mean,
Yeah.
where,
Within the 50.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I'm curious, you said the building code requirement for the, closer to the distance from the bank, was there a,
There is, yeah, in the building code, they actually have a diagram for it.
yeah, I didn't see that in the
It's a
standard.
steep slope. That's why I say, I think it's like 50 feet from the bottom of the
Okay.
footing to where it meets the slope.
To look that one up.
It says, if you can't meet that,
Right.
then you can't build there, but you just have to have an.
Prove that it's, yeah,
Yeah.
so it sounds like it's gonna have to be done anyways.
Yes.
Yeah, so,
Yeah, so.
Yeah. It-
Okay.
That would be a geotech. Obviously, if we would like some confidence to hire, to do that work as long as,
well, I think the
there's
question
no-
is stability.
Yeah.
And from my point of view, if it's felt, I'd like to see it personally, I would favor the report, to see the report, but
That's not a problem.
it's,
yeah, and it's who's maintaining a retaining wall that's making it stable and not stable. Question, you said the stairwell was increasing footprint. Are these 2 window wells as well increasing the footprint?
Yes. Yeah. Well, it depends, we typically don't, like, if we do a area summary of the footprint, we wouldn't include either the window wells or the stairwells. But obviously, from a bird's eye view, those are gonna be additional structures, that's why I pointed them out.
okay. Other questions? Questions from the public? to request a continuation for 2 weeks?
Yes, please.
Okay. Continue for 2 weeks. Is it 3 weeks now? Yeah, it's okay.
The next meeting is January 4th.
Okay,
Because I
3
don't
weeks.
think anyone wanted to meet December the 28th.
Oh, I'll let you. Okay, 4th. Okay. Nantucket Island Land Bank, 48 South Cambridge. Christmas thing.
Thank you. For the record, Paul Santos with Nantucket Surveyors representing the Nantucket Islands Land Bank. This is a notice of intent filing for property located at 48 South Cambridge Street. It's maybe familiar to you as we've been here within the last year. This is the former McAlinden residence, which was a single-family home that was constructed on this subject property that we came in and under a notice of intent remove that structure. And if you will go out there today, or if you have gone out as part of your due diligence for this meeting, their structure is gone, the site is stabilized, and it's essentially now a vacant parcel controlled by the land bank. The application before you is for the construction of a parking area, a viewing platform, and a walking path for public access and use on the subject property. The property itself parallels South Cambridge Street. What we're proposing is a 4-space parking area, just dirt parking area off of South Cambridge Street with an access path to a constructed viewing platform, essentially in the same area or a portion of the same area where the existing dwelling was. If you remember, that dwelling had a pretty expansive deck along the back side of it, which looked out over on Long Pond, and we're constructing a platform basically up in that plateau area. The deck itself, although the structure originally was within the 50-foot setback to the bordering vegetated wetland associated with Long Pond, we have kept the deck outside of the 50. So the deck is outside of the 50-foot setback, and we're not asking for any waivers or placement of that. The lot itself, where the parking area exists, is essentially already developed. It's a mowed lawn area, not manicured, if you will, but it is an area that's typically been mowed and maintained as part of the residential use that was formerly there. And again, we have kept the parking area outside, in this case, outside the 25-foot no disturb zone in that particular area. We had previously received approval from NHESP for kind of a complete look at what the intent of the land bank is for the property, whereas they didn't want to segment the property. So we did. This is in your package. It's a crude sketch that Rachel prepared and sent to NHESP, which basically shows the parking area, the platform, and then what ultimately our goal would be an elevated walkway and a dock out onto Long Pond. The dock would require a Chapter 91 permit. Elevated walkway would not, as long as we were up to the point of the mean high water of Long Pond. And what the ultimate goal here is to create a public access, get people off of the bridge, the kids that are crabbing and hanging over the bridge while traffic is coming out, and create a space here where we can have people come up and do the same thing they're doing down on the bridge, but out on a permitted dock. So the application itself before you, we do have our DEP file number. We do not need specific NHESP approval for this application because we already have it for the entire project, as they've looked at it already with regard to globally what we're going to be doing. And again, this application before you is simply for the parking area and the viewing platform and the essentially walking path to the platform itself. Resource areas are the bordering vegetated wetland associated with Long Pond. We do have flood zone that does come into the property. Our work is all below that, above that elevated flood zone. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Rachel is here also, and I'm sure would be happy to answer any questions that you may have. This is the here.
I'm wondering why, and it might be because of this lot, but the parking lot can't be shifted over just a little bit further
Yeah.
to 25.
No reason why I can't, actually. Yeah, there's no reason. I mean, grade-wise, we're trying to keep ourselves at a grade where we could have handicap accessibility to the platform. So somebody would come off of that handicap spot, which we would designate, and it would just be a level 2% grade right to the platform. But there is no reason why we couldn't shift that a little bit further to the north.
Yeah, that was my concern.
To be fair, that's something that you don't even really have to condition it if you don't get a waiver for it to be inside. It have to be outside.
Yeah, makes it simple.
Or you could add a condition that it has to be outside.
It's just that little portion of the walking path. Actually, you're talking about the,
And the parking area, like it just seems like we're expanding the footprint of what could be left alone almost by shifting it.
yeah, I gotcha.
I guess that's south.
Yeah, I mean,
Why can't it be a straighter shot to our platform from the
yeah,
parking area?
this makes sense.
We do have to come in, remember, we have to stay on our property.
Right.
The property line is
Yeah.
quite a bit off of the edge of the actual travel way on South Cambridge Street, so we do have to do enough to get ourselves, at least keep the parking spaces on the property itself. But I don't see any reason why we couldn't shift those to the
I think
north.
as long as we're meeting our grade
Yeah.
requirements for
Yeah.
accessibility, because that's one of our goals at this site, we're happy to bring it up as far as.
Yeah.
Are there going to be rails and that sort of thing?
That won't, under this scenario, as far as the walkway goes, as long as we keep it at 2%, you wouldn't need those. You wouldn't need it. It's not, the way this is laid out, it's a flat 2% grade to the platform is basically at grade. Whether the platform would need railing as far as the building code goes, that I don't know about, but it was, the platform itself would be a level grade right to it.
Yeah, no, you wouldn't need it.
When they built the one out, if you remember, out at the Warren's Landing area at the end of North Cambridge Street, that platform there didn't require a railing.
Yeah.
Right.
Flat platform.
Is it your own-
And there's some discussion too on, the best place for potentially where the dock would be, whether this is the most beneficial place or whether maybe trying to come back over here in the vicinity where people are using it now by the bridge. So when the time comes for the dock permitting, the elevated walkway permitting, will be back before you, either as a new notice of intent, which is probably what we'll do, or as an amended order to this thing. We separated this from the work for the dwelling, so that was a separate order of conditions. But I think Rachel has some correspondence with some of the neighbors down there, and there's been some interest in maybe why not try to put that dock.
There's so much more wetland to cross.
So, but obviously this is the shortest path. It's just the question is where it becomes the most, where they would like it.
I don't know if this is a question for you, Paul, or Rachel. Will this be ADA compliant?
That's our goal. I don't know that we're going to be able to make the dock itself ADA compliant, only because of the grade at the site, and that's where you get a real drop. But that is one of our main goals for the site, is we definitely want as much of the property as possible to be ADA compliant.
In that case, it would probably be good to have some kind of a bench on your platform, so,
Yep.
people who are walking out on crutches or something would have a place to sit.
Right.
I just was at that Worcester Poly hearing, so that's why
Right. It's a
this
very,
seems like a
yes,
great opportunity for that.
that's a good point.
What you have in front of you here is ADA compliant. That's a parking area with a 2% grade to a level platform. So
Now,
that's,
will there be a good surface instead of?
yeah, there'd be some surface there that would at least be able to roll a wheelchair up in that area. So.
No sand bed necessary for out-of-control wheelchairs to break.
Real quick, before we get another question, Rachel, can you identify yourself for the record, for the tape? Sorry.
Rachel Freeman, I'm representing the land bank.
You don't have to get up. You can
Okay.
identify yourself. For the folks watching at home,
Okay.
just in case. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions? Questions from the public?
So what would the boardwalk be made of? Would it be wood or would it be grade?
I'm sorry, what?
Or would it be the
Fiber grade?
Well, the dock itself,
Let's,
We're actually not,
That's good.
it's not even an application.
Sorry.
we don't want to jump into project components that aren't proposed.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, we have a question out in the.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Larry Levine. I am president of the Massasoit Village Condo Association, which is the association that has the land right next to the property that McElendon owned.
Yep.
As you may recall, one of the reasons that McElendon was interested in selling his property was because he was encroaching. His building was encroaching on our property, and he either had to move the house or sell the house for open space. We're all in favor of the open space, and I'm not sure exactly where what other approvals need to be obtained other than the one here for this to move forward. But there is a concern on our part, on the Massasoit Village Condo Association, is that when you look at the entire property looks like it could all be the land bank property, even though much of the property that is cleared is actually our property. And we would like to discuss the ability to maybe put some signage or a fence that would indicate where the land bank property ends and where our property begins, because inviting the public to come to the land bank property definitely has an impact on potential people coming to the other property that's not the land bank property. So that's one. Two is we're concerned about the use of a parking area after hours, at all times of the day or night, for the gathering of the groups that might be noisy and might be having trash that they might leave behind. So we want to know something about that. The provisions for policing the trash in the area that might occur, and also policing the area for non-expected uses. So those are really our three concerns, and I don't know whether this is the appropriate forum to bring them up in, or where we go from here, whether this is just one step in a process where we'll be able to raise our issues again, but I thought it would be important to bring it up here.
Thank you very much.
If I could, and I've spoken to Larry a few times on the phone, never met, so nice to meet you, Larry. So with regard to the property line, what Larry's talking about is McElendon's property was partially built on the condominium association's property. So really, when you go out there now, it appears that where the driveway was, to the left of what the house was, all appears to be part of this lot. It's really not. So I think, quite honestly, a post and rail, the platform itself has been set back the requisite zoning requirement off the existing property line to be compliant with zoning. It is a structure for the purposes of the zoning bylaw. And I think a post and rail fence along that property line would probably be a good idea. And in that way, this could be a post and rail fence. The platform will be zoning compliant, and that property can be either left to revegetate or just left alone, and the condo association could even post signage on it if it like. With regard to after-hours usage of the site, I'm not sure, Rachel, does the land bank post their properties with regard to hours or anything? I mean, do you?
Some properties, and it depends, and I would definitely say that that's probably something that you should talk to Eric Savetti, our director, about. We have met with some people from the Nantucket Residents Association, and they've expressed some different concerns, but if we have interested neighbors who have concerns about property usage, then we're really happy to meet with you and do everything we can to make it work.
And so, just where do we go from here on this? If you get approval from this board, is there any other forum that you need to go to get approval to move forward?
Well, you'd have the platform itself would be an HDC approval for the actual platform and the hardscape for the parking area and so forth. So it would be HDC, and then we'd need a building permit for the platform also. The dock procedure, once we get to that level, is a little bit more, that's actually back here, and then that's also a state approval through the Chapter 91 process So, and that's public notice, paper, abutters and so forth with regard to that. So that's a little bit more detailed process. But with regard to this, HDC, building permit, once an order of conditions is rendered from this board. And the fencing, and quite honestly, the post and rail fence on the property line, this board could condition that.
Thanks for the education.
So are you proposing the fence for
Yes.
putting the fence in?
Yeah,
Okay.
we would propose that post and rail fence along that property line.
Okay. Any other comment from the public? Okay. Any other comment from the commission? Okay, are we ready to close on this one?
Yes, I'd like to close,
Do we
please.
have everything? Do we have everything closed? Okay, do we have a motion? Second. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Amended orders of conditions. Taylor Creek Boatyard, 20 North Cambridge Street.
I'm going to recuse myself.
Lucky.
This one in the middle, I think it's pretty much
About the ability of some of the commissioners to sit on this. Everyone but Joel's doesn't have an issue.
Thank you again. For the record, Paul Santos with Nantucket Surveyors, representing the applicant, Taylor Creek Boatyard, Inc., or Nantucket Marine, as you all familiar with the site. Sarah Alger is here also with me today. She's representing the applicant, and we do have three of the principals of Nantucket Marine in the audience today, too. The application before you is an amended order of conditions. Just by a little bit brief history, in 2008, Nantucket Marine set forth a expansion project in which two components were proposed. A significant in-water proposal, which was a reconfiguration of the existing 60 slips that are located essentially within the marina or basin area, and then an expansion westerly down the creek. That expansion was modified, if you will, and an order of conditions was issued essentially for the reconfiguration of the slips only within the marina itself. That reconfiguration ultimately was not completed. However, we did redo all the dockage in the marina and put completely compliant floats, got rid of the styrofoam components and so forth, and then redid all the piling work within the marina. So that was all done as part of that original order of conditions. There was an extensive upland component at the time, which involved the placement of the new boat racks that were out there. We ultimately did the enclosure of the washdown building, a complete new tight tank facility, upgrade of the water system when water came to Nantucket, and a upgrade of the stormwater component of the marina itself. So there was a complete redo essentially of the upland area. That required permits from the Conservation Commission, also required an MCD permit from the Planning Board. The application before you tonight is a completely amended order of conditions for the in-water component or notice of intent, which is through the Permit Extension Act, through extensions that we've received, is still a valid order of conditions. The expansion is a proposal of 11 new in-water slips, finger piers, if you will, going from the existing approved Chapter 91 perimeter of the marina basin westerly down the creek. So that would be proposed. What we're proposing is a 5-foot wide floating main dock with 4 foot wide floating finger docks, approximately 32 feet in length. So we would have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 new slips that we would be utilizing within the creek itself. This application was before the Planning Board this past week, or 2 weeks ago, in which we did modify the MCD, and as far as the MCD permit goes, that was approved locally at the planning board level. Now, I've submitted the amended order of conditions request, and then I've also submitted a supplemental letter in which we kind of went through many of the reports that were filed under the original application. There was a significant amount of information that was looked at with regard to the creek itself, when we were looking at expanding the dockage further down, and then also for the reconfiguration for perimeter itself. So that supplemental information talks about the components of the creek being a fish run, which is fish run to Long Pond, head of Long Pond. At that point, there was a tidal prism analysis done by Epsilon Associates, in which they looked at the expansion with regard to the amount of floating dockage that was proposed and whether or not that dockage was going to raise the levels in the creek at all. Basically, that's what the tidal prism analysis was looking at, was the amount of dockage. Was that going to displace enough water where it would see a significant increase in the elevation or the water flow within the creek? The answer to that was no. These are essentially floating docks, if you will. There'll be 12-inch diameter fiberglass piles, and then the docks themselves will be floating docks that would move up and down with the tide. We speak about the buffer zone to the salt marsh, closest salt marsh being along the northerly portion of the 5-foot wide main floating dock. And essentially, we had reports done and information with regard to how boats come in and out of the harbor, how they utilize the docking spaces. And typically what will happen here is boats will come up within the creek itself. It's a no-wake zone. They're slow traveling boats. The boats are backed into the slips. The slips are set up in a way they're approximately about, the main dock is about 5 feet or so at its closest point off of the salt marsh edge. The dock itself is 5 feet, and then when a boat typically comes into this area, it's coming in with its stern up against the dock itself. It's coming in backwards. As they come in, the engine is lifted, the prop is out of the water, and so typically you're looking at about a 15.5-foot, approximately 15.5-foot distance between the edge of the motor on the boat and to the edge of the salt marsh itself. This occurs typically throughout the existing marina now, and that's what we're proposing would occur along these new 11 slips. So the boats would be stern in, slowly backing up, engine comes up, motor comes up out of the water, and then essentially what we're trying to do here is stop any type of prop wash that would adversely affect the edge of the salt marsh itself. There is a docking procedure document that I included within the supplemental information. It does talk about the 15.5-foot separation between the edge of the motors, the backside of the boats, and the salt marsh itself. We did make reference in there to potential of any type of prop wash screens if this commission felt that that was something that they felt strongly about. We will say that there are no prop wash screens anywhere within the marina itself now. Principals at the marina feel that if they're not necessary, that the way things have happened out here and the way things operate now, that there's been no significant change in that salt marsh edge for a number of years with what's been happening out there to date. There was some historic, remember on the west side of this particular dock here, where boats were typically even closer than this 15.5 feet we're talking about, and there's been no significant change in this salt marsh edge with regard to boats being parked on the west side of that floating dock in that particular area. We did also, Epsilon did provide under the original application, in addition to the tidal prism analysis, there was a shellfish survey that was done within the marina, or within the existing boat basin itself. At that time, the conclusion was that the marina itself does not have any adverse effect on the typical shellfish, and in fact, whether it be through shading or through the boat, the travel of the boats and so forth, that there's no significant adverse effect with regard to the marinas. In fact, in some cases, the marina itself provides a safe harbor, if you will, for some of these shellfish. I think at the time and I believe still that this is you can't, there's no shellfishing allowed within the marina itself. It is a protected area. That survey was done, again, in 2008. We feel that the findings of that survey are still valid today. It does talk about the tidal prism analysis concluded that Mattock Marine has experienced extremely rapid flushing, and the minor displacement due to the new docks and boats will have no adverse impact on the tidal prism volume, flushing rates. It also felt that there was no adverse impact with regard to the shellfish population. We're talking about, in this area, scallops, quahogs, and softshell clam would be the shellfish that you would find within this particular area. We are within a buffer zone to a coastal bank. Essentially, the coastal bank is the bulkhead. So really, from that point of it here, there's really no change with regard to our work on the coastal bank. Land containing shellfish, the performance standards are basically, within land containing shellfish, the performance standard for piers is that they shall be constructed and maintained using the best available measures to minimize adverse effects on the interest protected in the bylaw. Best available measures is defined as the most up-to-date technology or the best design measures or engineering practices that have been developed and are commercially available. The current docks that are out there are the most up-to-date, if you will, with regard to environmental sensitivity. The pilings themselves are 12-inch piles that support the floating docks and would be continuing that same type of layout in this particular area. With regard to the boats themselves, typical boats that you're seeing in Nantucket Marine right now are probably showing a draft of only about 24 inches, 24 to 25 inches. So they are essentially the boats themselves, whether they be in the 30 to 32, 34-foot range, you only have about a 24-inch draft on these boats. The bathymetric information that we have coming down the creek would support that these boats, even at a low tide or when they're in there, when the boats would be in during the season, that there's sufficient depth between the bottom of the creek itself and where the draft itself would be for the boat and where the prop would be for the boat also. As I had said, all the information, we did not resubmit much of this information because it's already in the file, and we're basically asking for an amended order of conditions and continuing on what we had previously done. I'll be happy to answer any questions, but just want to close at the last segment of the supplemental report. In addition to the foregoing, all the previous submissions and testimonies submitted at numerous public hearings are incorporated herein by reference. It is respectfully submitted that Mattock Marine's proposed docks represent the only reasonable alternative to maintain Nantucket's only working public marina. The proposed docks are a relatively minor action which provides significant public benefits to the people of Nantucket with valet access and to and from the water. Fuel services, safe harbor in event of storms. We believe that Nantucket Marine has more than met the requirements of the Nantucket Wetland Bylaw and has provided the Commission with as much information as possible to render a decision on this application. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. As I said, Sarah is here. We do have representatives of the boatyard, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Just to kind of stop, it's an amended order of conditions, and essentially we're asking for 11 additional slips. Will require full Chapter 91 filing, Army Corps, state, with regard to the next phase of this project. Obviously need a notice of intent before we can move on at this point. The current reconfiguration perimeter does not include the area that we are now talking about. So we would have to expand our reconfiguration perimeter and then provide a full Chapter 91 filing for the docks themselves.
I'm curious if there's any monitoring requirement on the edge of the salt marsh so that we can keep track of, you know, if it's eroding, and you know, it'd be nice to have some kind of measurement from the edge of the dock or something, you know, or I don't know if you could survey that. Or
you could. Yeah. It's a very. I mean, that could be surveyed on a yearly basis, on a 5-year basis. I mean, just knowing the area there. I mean, what they looked at when we looked at the original submittal, that there had been no, looking at historic photos, there had been no really significant change in that salt marsh perimeter over a number of years. Even after, you know, the area over here was dredged at one point, there was no. But that's something that can be located and documented without any issues at all.
To answer that question quickly, thought that would be coming. There's a kind of a condition like that, but I think it's something you guys can certainly expand on if you wanted to. There is a additional condition number 26 of the original order is an as-built survey plan and aerial photos shall be submitted to the commission office within 90 days of completion of construction. The as-built plan and aerial photos shall include delineation of the edge of the salt marsh resource area. I think that's something that you could certainly expand upon that to get some monitoring on the salt marsh edge over time, if you wanted to. But
I think that would be good, and including the old docks too, I mean, all the way around there, would be good.
Yeah, and the reason that we didn't have to comply, we really didn't have to, we didn't do that was obviously, this was gonna be completely reconfigured, that original dock, and that really never happened. So what's there now is the same that's been there since the original the permit, I think, was in the early 80s, was in early to mid 80s, and it's essentially the same thing. The only work that we've done on the site is the upgrade of the dockage and the replacement of the piles.
Yeah, I guess I wonder, like, in a storm situation, the existing slips are almost harbored somewhat, and this is almost in the middle of the channel in some spots. Do you anticipate any issues during storms?
And within the creek itself, you're talking about?
Yeah.
I personally wouldn't. I mean, Chris Shannon is here. Chris basically lives down at that in the boat and knows how kind of it looks. And in the storm situation, do you see anything different?
So
Chris Shannon from Nantucket.
Marine, just for the record. So in a prevailing wind during the summer, it's a southwest wind. Other than that, usually during the winter, it's a northeast. So the intrusion upon the creek there's going to be into about a third, I don't know, of half. But right now, there's our rental moorings are in the middle of the creek, so they fare all the storms the same. So I mean, with 12-inch pilings, floating dock, they're set up right now for a storm surge, 6 foot above. So in that water.
Does Nantucket Marine own the entire spit? Are there plans in the future to continue to extend the docks?
No. And we are limited to, there are limitations not just from here, there are limitations with regard to health issues, the tight tank, the MCD permits and so forth that do restrict us on how much parking, because every one of the slips requires a parking space, it requires a look with regard to Title V and the tight tank, so there are limitations that we are dealing with. And oddly enough, although the Nantucket sewer was not actually proposed to come down to Nantucket Marine as part of the Nantucket sewer expansion that was approved at town meeting did not include sewering Nantucket Marine. So essentially, we're on that tight tank and we're limited to what we have with regard to what we can do out there. I mean, I don't know if you weren't here, I don't think at the time, but that previous expansion was a pretty significant expansion. This is, very minor compared to that. Yeah.
Was there a shellfish count in this area?
What's that?
Was there a shellfish count?
Yeah, there's actually a full study that is part of the record.
And how far did it go down?
Yeah, in that specific area.
It was in the specific area of the basin.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was actually
it's just here,
the
it wasn't
basin.
for the
It was partially in here, but it was mostly the specific area was the basin itself. Yeah. Yeah, and that was in 08, and that was done by Epsilon. Yeah.
You probably don't have an answer to this question, but has anything been done to quantify like nitrous oxides from the boat engines in this area? Because obviously they do deposit nitrates into the harbor.
I can answer that question for you, Christian, once again. The progression of the technology now has gone from most, we used to have almost all two-cycle engines, two-stroke engines. You used to just dump all the oil right in the water. Probably 30% of the oil actually went in unburned into the water, so that would settle down at the bottom. So now 95% of the fleet has gone to four-stroke technology, which is all four-star, California car emissions rated. So the amount of just the technology in itself in the engines over the past years, the pollution is unbelievable. I mean, if you pull up, it's unbelievable how far it's advanced. So it's we specialize in outboard engines, four-cycle outboard engines, Yamahas. We don't do any diesel. We don't have any imports of that. So shallow draft, strictly all four-stroke. We're going four-stroke.
Okay.
95% of the fleet right now is four-stroke.
There's a couple of moorings out there. Are those moorings gonna stay, or are they gonna go?
We may actually, well, some of those are actually Chris controls one of the moorings here. These two are Mattocket Marine moorings, so the intent would be to potentially relocate those somewhere within the creek. They would be removed from this particular location here. So,
So just to answer that a little bit, to hop in, mooring relocations are covered under the kind of the town's license for moorings, but they're subject to approval by the harbor master for their final resting place within.
Which we've sat down with Sheila Lucy and shown her plans and discussed with her situation, so.
yeah. Everything that we filed with you, I've copied Sheila Lucy on also. So, and it's also gone to DEP, and it's also gone to Division of Marine Fisheries and Wildlife, so.
Would the property owners across the creek have received notification of this?
Yes. They would have received notification both for the planning board and for this hearing. And there was nobody at the there was no abutters and no opposition at the planning board meeting.
Now, a lot of that property right adjacent to the site is
Yeah.
That's just noticing
There's two.
so,
County of Nantucket,
so wet.
Yeah.
Landbank.
Yeah, these are real, I mean, I think it's Tennessee Ave over here maybe. I think most of these
Yeah.
houses are way up on Tennessee.
So this, you're saying, this was proposed initially to extend this far?
Oh, it was going, remember, it was all the way.
See, I don't even remember this.
Yeah.
No, it was,
Originally there, and then you guys,
I don't even know, I remember how many extra slips. There was 60 slips, additional slips
Going
going down the creek. Yeah, and then that was the original notice of intent filing, that was the MCD filing. And then at the end of the day, it became an order of conditions for simply the reconfiguration of the marina itself.
Right.
And the fact that we at that time brought it into ADA compliance. The dockage was brought into ADA compliance.
and then all the other work you were doing.
And then everything else was
Yeah.
upland. It was all upland, everything else was upland improvements.
Was there a portion of this that was approved down the creek stuff?
No,
So
no.
So
No, it was that was completely removed. It was completely removed from the application. I mean, all the studies were done, the work
information
was
there,
done,
right, I get it.
you know, but,
Well, I mean, I'd just like to hear of what the upshot of that was. You know, I mean, I can see that all the information was there and it was a much bigger proposal initially, but the fact that it didn't go through and it didn't get approved.
What's the concern? Was it presented to us as a whole? I mean, I
it
honestly
was a significant, I mean,
Yeah,
we're talking 11 slips in a small area. It was 60 slips completely down.
Yeah.
You know, it was,
Yeah.
and there was a lot of abutter
Yeah.
objection. There was, you know, and at the time, whatever decision was made, it was made not to scale it, just to scale it back. It was just to say, listen, the marina needed the racks,
Yeah.
they needed the reconfiguration, they had to become ADA compliant. And in 2008, the way the climate was, it was just, let's get the permits and move forward and, you know, and now a time has come, maybe we'll try to see if we can at least get, the 11 slips would be a help to them, and that's really what we're looking for today.
Do you remember, you said, Randy, do you remember?
I'm trying to remember what the objections were. I think there was shellfish issues and,
I think I have a copy of that.
Septic in there.
Yeah.
But I don't know, there's gonna be boats going into
In and out.
Hither Creek and Vancouver or something.
Yeah, right.
A question for Shannon, actually. When they talk about lifting up the engines and backing in, is that something that who polices that? I mean, the boat owners are pretty much.
No, so they back into the slip and they have to come in slow anyways, and when they get in, I mean, that's the only way that we allow it to come in. They can't come bow in, because the bow would protrude over the dock too much, and then people couldn't access the
Oh,
docks.
okay.
So, I mean, it has to, basically self-police it, so.
And I think sorry, Mr. Chairman, and I think you addressed that in here, so backing in, you lift the thing and it kind of drifts in, but when you're pulling out, that could potentially create most of the wash, right?
Right, but if you're pulling out of a tight parking space, it's just like
You're
you're
just-
pulling out of a space with a car, you're not gonna accelerate it, you're gonna come out real easy, because you've got to turn to make a 90-degree turn.
Mhm.
So you come out, and most of those
Right spot.
sites have power thrusters on them, so
Mhm.
they're gonna take it out and swing it out.
Gotcha.
So,
Okay.
Hard throttle, the one up in the bank.
You're right.
So to to answer your question,
Wow, yeah.
so that's why we had a little opposition. So what we're talking about now is this little component right there.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Questions from the public?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Emily Molden for the Nantucket Land Council. I think I remember writing some letters back in 2008, actually, looking at that old plan. I think at this point, our biggest concern is just the amount of time that's gone by since some of those original studies were done in this area, specifically like the shellfish study being from 2008. That's 8 years old, and I just think that as a standard, it's a good idea for the commission to require a more up-to-date baseline of that information before permitting something like this. I can't remember if it was Great Harbor Yacht Club or the town's pier down in Nantucket Harbor last year or the year before, but there was a request made, I believe, for a more up-to-date survey of shellfish in that area as well, just to provide a better baseline before moving forward. So I think that's something we'd like to see the commission request, if possible. And I'm not sure if Jeff or the administrator has any additional thoughts on that. But that's probably our biggest concern, just because so much time has gone by since the original proposal and work was done in the area. And again, I'm not sure, I haven't seen the report, I know it's in the old file, but just because it wasn't online, if there were actual counts done in this area or if there was more up there. So that's the request I would make.
What would you expect to be the result?
Well, again, I haven't reviewed the 2008 study that was done, and I certainly don't expect there to be a whole lot of eelgrass in this area, but I think that just understanding what the shellfish populations are there before constructing the new docks and piers is important information to have. Again, I'm not sure what Jeff thinks as far as past practices or standards that the commission has had them, but it just seems like 8 years is a chunk of time, and it's worth considering getting something more recent on file for the area.
Yeah, I think that almost goes along with what Ernie requested, with just a little bit more data on the edge of that salt marsh, so we have numbers before this project goes in. So.
Thanks, Alan. If I could, we'd be happy. I think we're willing to move on Ernie's requirement of getting a baseline information on the salt marsh. We have no issue also with providing additional information, an updated shellfish report. We would ask, moving forward, we still have to deal with public comments available. Everyone has comment during the Chapter 91, in which there'll be a lot more detailed information with regard to the docks themselves that will be provided to the state. That if we could make that a condition, an amended order with the conditions that those are conditions of approval, we'd appreciate that if that's something that we could do. That the shellfish updated survey and the baseline information would be a condition of approval. If the board could so see that they could move.
That was the point of my question, Emily. In other words, if there were double the amount of shellfish then that there were 8 years ago, would that affect our decision, or if there were half as many?
Well, yeah.
That was the logic.
Yeah, that was the
my
point of the
question to you.
survey. So, I'm not sure if you can set a baseline for
Well, it'd also be good to have a baseline of what is there now and see the boat traffic, maybe we could say every 5 years they do another shellfish survey or something and report.
Keep in mind that the permit
Oh, it goes
will
3 years.
expire years. I would love to have indefinite permits. The one thing that's kind of interesting and that's kind of been left out as part of the discussion, and something that's happened then, and something that I was thinking about before tonight, is there's a couple things that have happened since 2008 that kind of speaks to where we are now as far as shellfish and habitat surveys that are there. The most recent is, and most obvious, is the town remapped all of the eelgrass areas in 2015 for all of this area and didn't have any eelgrass present in the area. So from that end, that's one thing. I think looking at the shellfish population, again, is a really good idea. I also know that as part of the 2010 estuaries plan that was put out for Nantucket, Nantucket Harbor, Long Pond, and River Creek, kind of all together, included shellfish information as well. That having kind of compared the two in my half-hour free time today, they're pretty congruent as far as it's an area that's not overly abundant in shellfish, but I think that amended orders provide kind of a unique opportunity to look at what was permitted before, and when I look at the conditions before, I don't know, for whatever reason, 2008 was apparently a time where the commission did feel that monitoring was really an important aspect of permitting projects. So it's to no fault of whatever, but I do think it's something that, I mean, really when you're looking at doing the work and putting those pilings in the ground, I think having an understanding about what they're going into and what's there at the time is probably the smartest thing to do, and to kind of work around those.
So Jeff, sorry to interrupt, but what you're saying is we don't really have a baseline of what was there in 2008 to compare to, right?
I mean, we have that information from 2008 and 2010 for shellfish, for what was there.
Yeah.
And for eelgrass, we have
We expect.
2008, 2010, 2013, 2015.
Okay, we just haven't had monitoring. Since.
We haven't asked them to monitor to this point, and the edge of the salt marsh is obviously something that wasn't asked to get monitored as part of the project. And I guess if you were curious, you could do the exercise through, aerial photograph interpretation from the 2008 to 2014 to 2015, 16 aerials to move through and find out if there's been any migration. But you guys could certainly condition monitoring as part of that. I do think it's a good idea to have that information, and you could even condition that before work starts, that information be submitted. You certainly have that opportunity.
Well, I don't know what, you're not going to see the impacts of a project until the project's installed. So we should get a baseline. I agree with Emily on that. You get a baseline as to what's there now, but is there a threshold at which, to Ian's point, is there a threshold at which we wouldn't permit this?
Well, but Jeff just said it's not been mapped as eelgrass habitat,
No.
so the chances of it being.
And I can tell you from
installed
personal
habitat-
account, there's no real eelgrass left in the creek. The other creek, just to go through a water quality segment of it, Eel Creek is the one part of Nantucket Harbor that's really not meeting its TMDL goal at all. And it's the sentinel station for the Nantucket Harbor area for that specific reason. So,
Is that just nitrogen, the TMDL is trying to?
TMDL
use
is based solely on nitrogen.
in this case?
And we do have we have the 2008 report. I mean, we do have some of a baseline. I think it's important, the conclusion of the 2000 report, and I just read out basically one line because it talks about the marina itself. It says the marina basin and surrounding salt marsh likely provides significant predator refuge and a high nutrient availability to juvenile bivalves, thus also supporting adult populations throughout the actively used portion of the basin. So basically what it talks about is that the basin, that the marina itself, even through the pilings, to the salt marsh, its location actually does provide a refuge for, these shellfish that are in there. Like I said, the quahog, scallop, and then there was the soft shell clams. So, it's basically it's a protected area, if you will. And there's nobody that can go in here. Correct me if I'm wrong. Nobody can go do any shellfish.
No,
It's a protected area.
It's a closed area.
It's a closed area.
Although it did get dredged.
So.
It does get dredged, though.
Well, it hasn't been dredged in some number of years now.
Yeah.
Last dredging was,
Actually, 384,
yeah,
and before that was 86.
yeah.
That whole bottom, for anybody who knows Nantucket, or I personally go in the mornings there, it's a mud bottom.
saying it's not the best habitat in there. I mean, it's also Heather Creek, which, you know, is draining Long Pond, and we know what's down on Long Pond, and, yeah, and the dump, and,
Well, the 86 dredging came known as the Grossman Channel.
It was all part of that. I mean,
Right.
I think it got piggyback on.
Right.
So when that channel was done, but we did the project. It took us a couple of years to get all the permits from the Corps for the 304 project. And then all the dredge boards were put on the property just once.
So again, are we willing to provide an update to the 2008 shellfish survey? Are we willing to provide the baseline information? And if those could be set forth as a condition of an approval, we're more than happy to proceed with that as we move to the next step, which would be the Chapter 91 procedures, which would be state and federal.
Yeah, I just wonder how we,
yeah, what, I guess I'm not sure what you're asking. You want us to close it and approve it?
approve it with.
Yeah, we would ask that you close it with the conditions, that the additional conditions of the order of conditions, that we would provide an update to the 2008 shellfish survey, and that we would, there'd be a monitoring for the salt marsh edge incorporated into the order of conditions.
So you're saying basically doing a count of shellfish as a baseline, but not necessarily saying, having us decide what's a good level, or yeah, where the line is, where this would be maybe destructive to a shellfish bed.
Right, like if we have a certain percent coverage of shellfish
Right.
and this thing goes in and it decreases by 50%,
I don't think we've
that's
come
a
across that, but I
noticeable
wasn't on,
impact.
I wasn't on the yacht
Well,
club.
what if we did shoreline monitoring and shellfish monitoring over a 3-year period?
Yeah, I mean, I would think that we've got a baseline with 60 slips did, in there with regard to the shellfish survey. Again, it's an unknown, but that's,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, and I guess I'm still slightly concerned just because of other conversations in other areas, but like who's monitoring the boats? And I know these are smaller boats and most of their engines are more efficient and don't pollute as much now, but do they get checked on a regular basis for problems, and are those
They're so
logs
technologically
kept?
advanced now, so the automotive engine, if it's not running correctly, the performance is not gonna be there. So as soon as there's an issue, we know it. I mean, there's a complaint as far as runnability problems, and they're so technology advanced, we rarely have any issues that are fuel related when you have excessive pollution. Even if they do, I mean, it's not noticeable. I mean, with an old 2-stroke engine, absolutely. If you were to lose a cylinder or what have you, you could actually see the fuel coming out of the engine in the water. With these, you cannot. But you can notice the performance.
I would say this too, Ash. The upland portion of the work that we did had significant monitoring information on it. It had to do with the washdown building, the recycling. It had to do with, and every year when I go to get information from Chris, information, daily logs on the cleaning of the catch basin, the washdown building, chain of command for the waste that leaves that, rainfall data on a daily basis at the marina. I mean, they've got a lot of people, not only the state, federally, that they kind of answer to, and it's been everything that I've ever needed. I've gotten, and the information we've always had is Chris is there, the owners are there on a year-round basis. I mean, they have everybody's interest at best on what's going on out here.
Well, I guess as we mull this over, would there be a situation where we ask them to be removed? Which would be
Failure criteria.
Which would be a major issue, wouldn't it, for the marina office? So,
And that would go to court, no doubt, and, so that'd have to be a pretty substantial reason.
Right.
And again, I don't shellfish, but it doesn't sound like it's great habitat in the first place.
Well, I can tell you honestly, looking at our water quality data, it's an area that Heather Creek is frequently hypoxic. So it's not so nice. If I were a shellfish, Connecticut Harbor, I would choose a lot of other spots.
Yeah, somewhere.
I mean, in going through the reports today, when you look at species richness for both invertebrates and shellfish, when you even look at Long Pond, Mattock Harbor, Hither Creek, the lowest amount of species diversity and density is within Hither Creek and not within Long Pond, Mattock Harbor. So,
This certainly won't help us improve.
Right.
Yeah, I would think your big, not so much the shelf, I mean, I understand that the salt marsh issue, I think, is a bigger issue. Now, that's something that can be monitored, and is actually, again, we don't have any prop screens or anything out there, but there are methods that can be done in an attempt to even stay in front of that. I mean, I don't think we've seen any movement in that salt marsh, but I mean, I think that's more of the concern than the shellfish would be. And there's ways that we can completely monitor that. As I said, we did offer some information in here with regard to typically what you would do for prop washes. It's basically 2-inch screening, spaced apart. It's tacked to the backside of the dock, and it's basically a buffer between the props and the edge of the marsh. But Chris, you've never had any prop washes out there on anything that would.
But you're in the closest spot you are is going to be, I think it's close to 50.
50, yeah.
That's the closest.
So I'd be concerned of that creating a flow issue.
The screening.
Yeah, I just, we're talking about the creek has bad, doesn't flush very well, I'm sure.
Well, the screens would be actually perpendicular to the current flow.
Correct. Yeah, in the backside, tacked on the backside of that.
But how do you communicate the requirements of how to dock to the to the users? Is there like a handout, or do they?
No, there's a handout with all the rules and regulations, plus when they come in there, I actually personally go over each. We have tenants that are in year. We don't have, there isn't any kind of transient mooring rental. So it's all on an annual basis. So everybody knows what the rules are when they come in, they're explained to them, and it's done annually. So if there's any update as far as what they're allowed to use, only biodegradable soaps, et cetera, et cetera. So.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing, so that they know that their continued use of the site in general is dependent upon it being environmentally as friendly as possible. And I think when it starts coming down to that, people start being a lot more careful if they know that their use of the area can depend on it. So I think that's important.
if I may, I just tried to brainstorm kind of what that condition that we've been kind of kicking around would sound like, and just throwing out a little bit of language. I think if you put it to say, prior to the start of work on the 11th slip expansion, a report including photographs shall show the current edge of salt marsh, composition and density of shellfish and any eelgrass found within the expansion area. And then that report shall be filed with the commission on an annual basis for the duration of the permit.
Photographs and a surveyed location.
I mean, it's 11 slips for someone to go and hop in the water, go count shellfish for a little bit. Wouldn't take a lot.
Right.
But I think that's what that condition may, with a little bit of tweaking, may sound like to kind of accomplish what's being talked about. And provide something that frankly isn't in the original order of conditions for any kind of monitoring of the facility.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that.
Right, and also, are we also talking about adding on monitoring of the existing slips? Because I think that was a bit of an oversight, not to have any monitoring in 2008.
Monitoring slips as in,
Just a survey of the Marsh
Right.
Bank.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah,
exactly.
that's what we're talking about.
for the whole area.
Yeah.
I think that's a good idea, just because I think now we would ask for that.
Right.
Yeah. It's pretty standard now.
I think the way that would read then would be to show the current edge of salt marsh for the entire facility.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for the entire basin.
Which we
Because
mentioned
it's, I mean, shudder to say this, it's Spartina and there's not significant like Phragmites or anything moving in on the edge, yeah, so
No,
it's
that's all.
something we'd wanna
Mhm.
see.
And how many pilings are we talking? It looks like, what, 9 pilings?
I think I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, so one at the end of each floating finger, and then maybe 2 or 3 on the main
So
dock.
I think maybe there's 10, maybe there's 9, but the other thing you have to remember about these pilings, and this is what we also considered when we did the last project, was we went with fiberglass hollow pilings, so when you drive them, it's actually not displacing. So it goes through. You also don't have any, wood debris and the rotting and what have you, and all that, so.
Piercing pilings. What are they called? Piercing pilings?
Pearson is the manufacturer of Pearson pilings, and they become quite popular with environmentalists around the country and projects and beaches, and they're actually using
CCA,
Yeah, it's a thin wall fiberglass. It's a very thin wall fiberglass, and then they just cap the top, and
How far down does it go?
It all depends on the bottom there, it goes 18 feet to 20 feet.
I think I'm happy with the way we're conditioning it.
yeah.
Definitely, I agree that the creek is the most diverse place.
We eat the shellfish which repair.
Not the best place, but let's do what we can and not
That is
make
a
it work.
closed area to shellfishing, so I would hope you were
Right.
eating the shellfish from that area. And then you went letting the shellfish work.
Yeah, I'm like, how many people after you?
Okay. So, okay, where are we here? So, yeah, so.
Motion approved with conditions for survey.
I think the motion that you would want to make, not to interrupt, would be move to close the public hearing and issue the amended order of conditions with the additional condition as drafted. Did I get that right?
That's a good motion.
Okay, and we're gonna, and do the same regulations we had on the, I remember with these, we had no boats behind the barrier, behind the pier.
Those conditions are.
Those conditions carry over
Right.
on the previous one.
Right, because we're under the same order.
Right.
So moved.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, passes unanimously. Okay. Colson, 9 Hallowell Road. Thank you for that. In a fog. I was like, where are we?
Welcome back, Joe. He needs a little peek at this pup.
Spitball.
What's that? Could've made a run.
By the way, I can get the surveillance footage from Fairgrounds.
No witness.
Good evening, Bobby Mack, the applicant Nancy Colson. We're before you for an amended order of conditions. The current order permits us to demolish a portion of the building and lift the remainder of the main dwelling up and put a new full foundation under it. That was, I think, issued maybe 3 months ago. Plans have changed a little bit. The initial reason for demolishing the garage portion was mold. I think they discovered some further water infiltration issues with the main structure. There's concerns about mold. So what you have before you tonight is to actually demolish the entire structure and replace it with a new structure. It's the same footprint, same foundation that was already approved, but it's a new dwelling. That's basically it.
So that gets rebuilt. House gets rebuilt. Everything gets rebuilt except for the foundation, right?
Right. The little building here that's shown as the two-story garage dwelling. I'm sorry. Over here, the 2-story dwelling over here remains.
To remain. I see that.
Yeah.
Okay, got it, yeah.
But the rest of the structure, it makes a lot of sense, construction-wise, to remove the existing building. There's a lot of issues with it, so.
Other questions?
For me.
No. Questions from the public? Emily?
Thanks for sharing. Emily Molden for the Nantucket Land Council. I just was looking at the aerials of this area, also in relation to the other notice of intent filing that got continued tonight, but just realizing that this lot is protected by a small bulkhead. I presume that the structure was originally a pre-78 structure at some point in time, and now that there's an application before you to actually demolish the whole thing and rebuild it, I'm just wondering if it would make sense to put some kind of finding in the conditions, just so that moving forward there's some documentation that this structure is being rebuilt, because in the future, if there's a desire for additional protection, it would maybe follow along with it that this is actually a new dwelling.
Interesting point.
Since it's already being protected by a bulkhead. I know that there's no proposal to do anything now, but it just seems like an opportunity since they're in here for renewal.
I can actually answer that question, because
Thank
it's
you.
something that's already been contemplated and been taken out of your hands to some degree. That under coastal banks, the 8th performance standard that's there, when we try to get it on all that we have it, is all permits issued for the substantial improvement of an existing building or new construction of buildings under the bylaw within 100 feet landward of the top of the coastal bank shall contain the specific condition that no coastal engineering structure of any kind shall be permitted on an eroding bank in the future to protect the project allowed by this permit, except those coastal engineering structures allowed by a waiver issued pursuant to section 1.03F of the regulations. So we have to try to meet waiver criteria for this, and then our regulations already kind of contemplated for substantial improvement.
Yeah.
That's pretty interesting. So doing,
Bulkhead's bad. They'd be better off rebuilding the house, not losing the bulkhead.
Right, well, that falls into the substantial improvement, for sure.
I think
so-
I've
so-
run into a little bit of funny business with
Well,
is
So substantially improved relates specifically to the expansion of habitable space. So I think you'd have to have an additional finding to deal with that it's not substantially improved, but you're rebuilding a structure.
Yes,
Mhm.
new structure.
that sounds substantially improved to me.
Well, whether you feel it's substantially improved or not, it may not meet the
Right.
specific definition.
It can be conditioned that it specifically will not have a pre-78 exemption.
Well, that's, I mean, I think, is that,
Well, it would only come into play really when you look at it in the terms of, they obviously have the ability, they have a lawfully installed and permitted bulkhead structure that's there.
can they
They're
lawfully
allowed to
maintain
lawfully
it?
maintain in good repair.
They just can't, okay.
That was there.
Right.
If they were going to rebuild, replace, expand, substantially improve that bulkhead, then that would
Another
come
story.
into a question that pre-78 of the existing structure wouldn't necessarily apply.
right.
So I think what you would look at is, instead of, maybe replacing the timber bulkhead, is you'd be repairing what was there, and if you needed to vertically expand or something, you might have to look towards a different option for the
Right.
consideration.
Gotcha.
Right.
Well, Well, yes, and also it's like a sidestepping because the bulkhead was built specifically to protect a house that will no longer be there.
Well, this bulkhead's been since before 1978.
Well, that'd be before 72 to get the state act.
That's a pretty old bulkhead.
Right, that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying, but if the house was pre-78, the bulkhead technically could have gone in.
A lot of these are pretty old.
Yeah.
All the old groin structures are not new for
Right.
situations like this. So you're kind of stuck. If it's a structure that predates, you can't necessarily order its removal because the house is changing, because that structure itself was at one point a permanent structure.
But
Or
modifying the bulkhead is a whole nother.
Right. So if
Right.
you came back and you said, we had our bulkhead and I need to raise that bulkhead 6 feet vertically
Mhm.
to provide the same level of protection. If you don't have a pre-78 home,
Mm.
the regulations don't allow for the expansion of that bulkhead without a waiver. So
Right.
you
So-
either have to demonstrate that you're meeting the waiver requirements or provide an option that meets the performance standards of the regulations.
Right.
So you might end up, it's kind of what I think we're going to see over time is we're going to start to see some of these older structures for newer buildings become kind of hybrid structures because no one's going to want to tear out the bulkhead to put something different.
Right.
With maybe a few exceptions, but you'll start to see things like 4 logs on top of bulkheads instead of just
Something like
No,
that.
you're going to see, you're going to see arguments. You're going to say that since it's on the same footprint,
Okay.
that footprint is entitled to protection, right? No.
More questions?
One
Yes,
more
please.
question, and I know poor Bob, this isn't even being exposed, kind of besides the point at the moment, but my last question that maybe Jeff can address is, I know in the past there's been questions about ongoing conditions after a permit ends, which is why I think that part of the regulations, I don't really know how people feel about that, requiring a condition that something not happen in the future, but maybe it's wise to put some kind of a finding in the order that has a statement about it, and that's up to Jeff, findings or
Yeah.
condition, but just is something I was wondering about myself, whether it's better to just have a finding in the order or put a condition in. Thanks.
Findings are nice because they're not requiring someone to do something. It's simply that the commission is making a determination. It's more of a statement of fact. Condition is a requirement for someone to do something. So I think if you were going to make a finding that the complete rebuild of the structure removes any pre-1978 status or the structure will be considered a new structure, that would be a finding because that's a statement of fact. You're not making the applicant do something.
Is that recorded on the property, or does that disappear?
Well, it gets recorded on the order of conditions.
I think it'd be a good thing for us to know, probably you too, Bob, right?
I'm sorry?
That'd probably be a good thing for everybody to know with the finding, to see what,
Well, I'm wondering on what basis you'd make that finding.
so how would we determine that criteria? Is there,
Well, I think you have to look at it in the sense that,
who makes the finding? Do we make the finding?
well, you would make the findings, but I think you'd have to have justification by saying the complete removal and rebuild of the structure is starting that structure from the date of new construction.
Right.
It no longer qualifies for protection.
I mean, I guess that's the question. I mean,
Right.
you know, I feel kind of bad that Bob is stuck up here for this discussion because it's probably a discussion for the whole, but it's something that, and correct me if I'm wrong, if someone knows, if you had a historic structure or a structure with a certain date, and if you demoed it and rebuilt it, I think if you were part of the historic commission or the HDC, you would view it differently than if you were just remodeling the existing structure.
Right.
I think that was the whole shenanigans that started with the years of, well, I left the interior wall up, built my house around it, and then no one ever found out that I tore out the historic wall and I have a brand new structure on my historic house. And that was what they stopped to do that.
See, Bob is wondering whether or not to go back and keep one corner of this.
Oh, go ahead. Everyone else does.
Well,
No, I mean-
you know, if we make the finding on what real grounds are, there's gotta be some basis to,
Well, I think you'd say that, you know,
I mean, I
complete removal and replacement of the structure would constitute
that
new
certainly
construction.
seems, common sense speaks that way for sure. You know, but is that,
I mean, and then certainly, the
does
choice
the
of
law say otherwise?
the choice of the applicant would then say, well, it's kind of, that's a little uncharted, but not necessarily, is if the applicant wanted to alter that finding, they would have to come back to amend the order and specifically justify why it's going to
I mean, the
still be the original historic structure,
Right.
the
The
same
pur-
pre-78 structure.
purpose of that finding is for future boards to see
Right.
in the file
Right.
if changes to the,
Well, and that's the purpose
Okay,
of
it's
the
come up.
performance standard that's there, that if you substantially improve, I mean, it was, the purpose of that standard, and I remember sitting through all of the regulatory hearings for it, was the concern of the board at the time was you were seeing retreat of these historic structures, they move them back, they build their coastal engineering structure, and then they come in and they drop on a, you know, they double the size of the pre-78 structure, and then when they need the erosion control structure, they justify it as a pre-78 home. And
Right.
the thought of that was, they're not meeting the spirit of the regulation by saying, well, our 500 square foot fishing shack that we've expanded to a 2,500 square foot structure is the pre-78 structure still. Now, the really smart people got around that because they said, well, the garage up front is still a pre-78 structure, and that's what that is, so. That's a different story.
this application isn't for the retaining wall, but, I mean, for the bulkhead.
No.
So,
Yeah, forward.
so to move forward here, but I think a statement of such that this is the finding of the board, that this is,
This is a new
the-
structure.
the structure
I
becomes,
think you would say that
Just
based
that
upon the
we would put it in-
rebuild of the
right.
structure, you're considering it a new structure.
it is, the new structure is, yes, I think that would be all that needs to be
Oh,
said.
this one.
And I don't think you have to say anything other than that, because I think that sort of makes our statement of our thinking, so.
As long as that doesn't allow for like new structures within the 25 foot.
Well, that'd be a whole nother,
Well,
Like
that would be a
wording
whole-
of that.
yeah.
A whole
That'd be
nother,
a whole nother
if you
thing.
wanted to expand the structure into the 25,
That's
that
right.
would require waivers
Right.
against that, for
Right.
that.
Same footprint.
Right,
Yeah.
okay.
It's actually slightly reduced from what's there now.
Well, the deck is existing.
Are you removing the deck, or
Well,
you were gonna elevate?
We've already
Left the
permitted,
deck.
we've already
We were
permitted
gonna
the
remove the
rebuild
decks,
of the deck in place.
Yeah,
So,
no, you start forgetting the little things, the deck. Okay. So, any other questions? Okay, questions from the public, any more? No? Okay. Go over it. Does someone want to make a motion to close the meeting and?
wait, hold on.
Hold on.
You might want to see if the applicant.
No, I'm sorry.
had any other responses or anything to
Any other comments?
the
No, I think-
discussion.
I mean,
Points?
that's your feeling for this particular amendment. So.
Yeah.
I mean, if they don't want to do that amendment, they don't have to.
Well, they can always come back and
They
play.
can come back and amend it again.
Or keep
Yeah.
their moldy house and.
Well, yeah, I mean, the mold is an actual issue, so, I mean.
Yeah. Okay.
They're never easy.
Okay. Thank you.
Move to approve as amended with the specific finding that the demolition will create a condition of defining this new house.
The new house, perfect.
Second.
No, it's good. Second, all those in favor? Any opposed? Okay, passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's interesting.
Okay.
I feel like that's a topic for another day.
Yeah.
Discuss Further.
Okay, we're going into public meeting, request for determination. Carpenter, 17 Columbus Avenue. Carpenter? Party of,
Jeff Boswell's.
party of one. We bored him, he left. Okay.
I guess since no one's here, just carry it forward.
You can care for it. Cool. I like that.
I'm not feeling like the Christmas spirit to try.
That's okay. So we'll carry Carpenter forward, 17 Columbus Avenue. And now we're going to Palme Family Trust, 46 Dukes Road.
Don Bracken for the applicant. This is a pretty straightforward conversion from a septic system to a sewer system to tie into the sewer force main that was installed in Dukes Road 2 years ago. There's a wetland on the other side of the road. So as you can see from the plan, work will be within the 100-foot buffer of that bordering vegetated wetland on the other side of the road. We're going to retain the existing septic tank, retrofit it with a grinder pump system, and tie into the existing force main, which is on our side of the road, probably about 2 feet into the road. The existing septic system right now is about 60 feet from the BVW, and that will be removed or abandoned. That's it.
Cool. Comments? Questions?
Looks like it's
Pretty straightforward. Sounds good.
I have a question that isn't strictly relevant, but I'm curious as to how much it's going to cost them.
Probably, I mean, 10 to 15,000.
Cheaper than your septic system.
And how long do these pumps last?
Well, according to the manufacturer, they should last about 20 years. But these particular pumps we're using from a manufacturer that has actually brought the pumps out, and they have a trailer on island. They have all the replacement parts for it. So
Really?
it's a lot easier than the E1 pumps that have historically been used because they're not as easy to get parts and pumps for. The other benefit here is we're using an existing septic tank. There's a lot of emergency storage in that tank, so that if something goes wrong with the pump or the power or whatever, and it's well water anyway, so that, if the power goes out, you're not going to have water. But if something goes wrong with the pump, there's 1,000 gallons of storage in there.
Oh, great. So he's got.
And they have a alarm. It comes with an alarm system.
Yep.
Obviously. So.
Okay. Great. Okay. So
That's it.
that's it already? Okay. Do you want a motion? You want to make a motion on this one? Oh.
This would be, you'd be moving to issue.
Oh, we're missing
as a
neighbors?
-3, allowing
Oh,
the
sorry.
work zone.
Yes.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Just keep me on my toes today.
I'm kidding.
Thank you.
This is some weird layout. Not in it today. Okay.
There you go.
Minor modifications. Hunter Realty Trust, 47 Cliff Road.
Good evening. Mark Ritz from Site Design, representing the applicant. I'm here along with Bill Hunter, who's also representing the applicant. What you have in front of you this evening is a request for a minor modification on a property that we've spent quite some time on a while back. The contents of the minor mod tonight are the relocation of a previously approved spa, which used to be over here. It's moving a little bit closer to the 50-foot buffer. It's still outside the 50-foot buffer, and it's still landward of the bulkhead that was approved and installed. The spa used to be here. The other change is the addition of a fire pit, little patio and fire pit here, here, and that's also outside the 50-foot buffer to the coastal bank, which is at the bottom of the slope. All proposed work is outside of the 100-foot buffer to the BVW, which is off property at the bottom of the slope. And the only other changes are the house footprint has been modified slightly based on some recent HDC approvals, and a bit of architectural changes, but most of the house is outside the 100-foot buffer. And as you can see, the outline of the former house location, the house is moving further back. So there's less house inside the 100-foot buffer than there was previously anyway on this project. That's basically all we've got in this minor mod. So we're not going to hear Mr. Clement speak on behalf of the I believe something like that. And the previously approved spa, you had Commission required that it be drained outside of the 100-foot buffer. We're obviously going to, carry that condition forward. We've got plenty of room on property outside of the 100-foot buffer.
Nip it down
Okay, well, I think we could, I'll move we could approve this as a minor mod.
I second that.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No.
Thank you.
Creepy. Okay, certificates of compliance. Thompson, 14 Fargo Way.
All right, so this one has been carried over a couple times. Just kind of go over it really briefly. They submitted it, and I have been kind of having an ongoing battle with the applicant on this one to actually bring the project into compliance. And every time they start to get it into compliance, something happens, and a different piece of it comes and isn't there. So the first part, if you remember, everything was covered up fine and was installed correctly, and everything was happy. They just needed to plant the bank. Well, they planted the bank, and in the interim, one of the storms that came through exposed part of the sand-filled tube on the front, so it's not properly covered anymore. I explained to him that before his original certificate of compliance is issued, he needs to bring the structure back to its design compliance.
Are there failure criteria on this one?
Yes, there are. So I'm kind of inclined, since the last report they submitted with the plantings, to say they submitted it, I informed them they needed to bring it back in. I would say if we carry it forward to first meeting in January, if it hasn't been rectified by then I would say we first off deny the certificate of compliance and then issue out an enforcement to bring it into compliance or remove the structure. Because I'm tired of monkeying around with Mr. Thompson.
Yeah, this has been on.
What was the fair criteria as far as keeping the bank covered? Was it after every storm when there?
It's never been in compliance.
Yeah, it's gone back and forth. Really, what's happening right now is his bottom two sand-filled tubes are exposed.
Yeah.
And when I explained to him that the UV light is the worst thing that those things can see, that was there, and in no short of words, he explained to me that he doesn't have a lot of money, and all I'm trying to do is make him pay a lot of money. And I'm like, well, you're the one that designed and submitted the project to look like this. So that's a consideration you have to take before you undergo these projects, is that at some point your contractor is going to want to receive payment for a service, and these things take money to maintain. And back and forth. So I just told he and his consultant that he has through the next meeting to get it to where it needs to be, or a recommendation is going to be to deny a certificate of compliance, and then we'll reinforce. This will be a second enforcement on it, so we can they can issue a $50 ticket. But I would also say if we wanted to, maybe to order some restorative action and see how that played out.
So for now, we just carry it forward, or do we need to?
Well, they submitted new information, and it showed new problem. So I told them we're going to have to the next one to fix the new problem. Because it wasn't the problem in the original submission. They fixed that problem, and they had a new problem. And I was just thinking, you just need to fix it all.
How long has work been essentially ongoing on this bank?
Oh. 2 years.
For 2
easy.
years, totally out of compliance with ongoing impacting.
Well, part of it wasn't out of compliance, part of it was the initial construction. The initial
Right.
construction then ended with the structure, then he moved into non-compliance. It was enforced back into compliance. But now he's wanting to file for his certificate of compliance, and the structure is the guts of the structure is constructed at this point correctly. It's the maintenance activity and the sand and the plantings that is an issue. So
Which are the central, characteristics.
it's kind of a project caught in limbo. So, well, that's the problem is he submitted the first time because he was all happy that he got his sand in and the mix all right and everything was there. And said, well, there are no plants. Plants. So the plants went in, and when the plants went in, by the time they went out and surveyed it and took pictures, we had had some weather and the sand on the front disappeared. So it was no longer in perfect compliance. And I'll be the first to say, for some of these things, you can't ever expect it to be like out of the box, shiny new, but it can at least be close, substantially close. So that was the timeline that I set forward, and I just met Stan Humphries as his consultant with Stan in person last week, so I kind of shot for the forward.
Yeah.
And if it's not there, just say deny.
That should give enough time.
That sounds good, yeah.
Yeah.
Can you just take care of that, or do we need to do anything here?
We just need to continue it to the.
Okay.
Sorry, that was a really long answer.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No? Okay, we will continue that till the 4th. Thompson, 14 Fargo Way. So, DeAngelis, 109 Baxter Road.
Yes, DeAngelis, 104 Baxter Road. This was one of the first house relocations up on Baxter Road. It's one of the ones way at the end. They completed their retreat, kind of max away. They're actually partially within the layout of Baxter Road from the zoning relief that they have, but it's complete. There's no really ongoing conditions, it was just a retreat project.
Okay.
Move to issue a certificate of compliance.
Okay. Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Grove Lane Realty Trust, 24 Grove Lane.
All right. So 24 Grove Lane, this was for the renovation relocation of the existing structure, renovation relocation of the existing garage, construction of the driveway, installation of stormwater management, revegetation, creating landscaping utilities. All of the mitigation plantings are in. All of their monitoring reports have been submitted. The buildings are constructed in compliance. That's there. Everything looks pretty good in that respect. The fact that they've actually submitted their monitoring reports is a good plus for them for when they've done them. The one thing I would ask is, since we are dealing with the mitigation area, the restoration area, that we continue that condition number 20 for the 2017 and 2018 years required by an additional permit, just to make sure that we get, just to get those last 2 years.
I'm sorry, I missed that
We're
last
adding number 20.
Condition number 24, it's our monitoring report
Yeah.
requirement, so we get more than just 1 year of monitoring data.
Okay, continue monitoring. Right. Okay, would someone like to make that motion with the addition 24, the continued monitoring?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No? Passes unanimously. Orders of conditions.
Oh,
Medalone.
we only have the one tonight. What's the land bank one? So if everyone just takes one and toss it around. I gave you some extra sheets.
Yeah, I would say, sure, number 20.
Yeah.
Parking lot shall be moved out of the 25. It's actually, the parking lot's in it, but the walking
The
path.
walkway.
The walkway's
Yeah,
not.
I think they're gonna.
Well, I think if we just added a 20 that says that parking and pathway
Right.
shall not be located within the 25-foot buffer zone.
Oh, and they,
Because there was the issue of handicap accessibility, so they were talking
Right,
about
and
moving
grade.
within the parameters of being able to.
the other,
Yeah, they're trying to get the grade
Right.
correct, right? But they think they can do that, so I think it's pretty safe.
Yeah, there really wasn't much of it. That was inside.
This is split.
Nothing else.
yeah, it's up,
So, okay.
moving platform installation,
Okay.
split rail fence.
Without fencing.
21, split rail fencing shall be,
Oh, they got it.
Split rail on the.
oh, they got that.
Permit overview. Yeah.
Where?
On the overview. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
Okay. Someone want to make a motion?
Motion to,
Go ahead.
vote, what they're doing.
Moved issue as amended.
A second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. We're such a polite board.
See, then we get this.
Sorry,
Gets
sorry
the-
sometimes.
Around 6
Number
o'clock.
half.
Around 6:30.
Okay. So then, moving forward to monitoring reports.
All right, so real quickly, let's jump in. 3 of them have been included in your pack to look at, including ones with 24 girls that we just did.
Yeah.
2 more from SCF, very interesting. And then the Pond Coalition asked to send someone tonight to provide an update. Apologize for making you wait so long to get there on where they are with the White Goose Cove Phragmites removal project.
Yep.
So if you just want to introduce yourself for the record.
Sure.
And you can
I'm Dr. Doug Horst, and I live on Long Pond. And as part of the Pond Coalition, they assigned me the task of doing the monitoring of the plant condition and the soil condition. We also had a separate agency doing the water condition to look for invertebrates there. And so we have done our pre-treatment assessment and post-treatment assessment 2 weeks afterwards, and we plan a third one, of course, in the spring when we can really see what happened. So we've submitted our report and happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Any kind of sort of on the ground improvements so far?
Yep.
No.
No, I think clearly the effect of the herbicide will only be appreciated next spring when those regrow. It's sprayed at the end of the summer.
Yeah, when was that done? Was there wouldn't have been any dieback? It was,
sprayed in October, actually.
oh, was it? Okay.
So, in my assessment,
That
as I
was
went
late.
out, I assessed all the plant life in the area.
Yeah.
And the Phragmites are sort of at the end of their summer, and it's starting to get a little brown.
Yeah.
And 2 weeks later, after the spray, they're looking a little browner and a little more saggy.
Yeah, right.
But in the area that was not sprayed, which I used as a control, they looked exactly the same. So
Gotcha.
we really have to wait to see what happens. Now, from the project a year before, you could see where they had been killed and then cut off and mulched, that there was very little regrowth. There was only about 5%, I'd say, where the stuff had grown back. So it was very effective on the small area previously treated. I can also state, and I'll say this without bias because I was looking at this carefully, that the other plant life in that area seemed unaffected. There was all the stuff that I expect to see, that I see in my front area and that I see in the other areas during my survey, were all growing nicely there with no Phragmites. So that first trial seemed to be a good harbinger that this one will work well also. But I think the real question will come in the spring when we don't see the Phragmites grow and we see everything else growing properly. I'll be quite happy about that. But we might.
Good.
I will tell you that the soil samples we took showed no change of significance in terms of invertebrate activity. We're measuring that by looking at CO2 production, which was a kind of from high school expand the claim. The water quality survey, unfortunately, I think was flawed, and we can't make a conclusion from that. I think the samples that were taken on site were not taken appropriately for comparison because of the lack of booth availability. So we're unfortunately going to toss that out and check it again in the spring.
And you're taking the water samples?
No, that's done by a company that we hired because they're doing an analysis under a microscope and looking at water. So I'm doing soil and plants.
And did you, I know you're measuring CO2 for invertebrates, but are you doing any species analysis?
Not on the soil, no. We're using this as a measure. I think this committee actually approved that as a marker that would be an acceptable measurement of soil invertebrates. It does, looking at CO2 production requires a couple of things. One, you have to have invertebrates produce the CO2. Number two, you have to have material from which they can live and produce the CO2. So for example, the sample that I took, just as much as for control as anything from the sandy area where the beach grass is, virtually had no activity, but one wouldn't expect much in this shifting sand in terms of detritus or material that they can make CO2 from. So I think as a measure across boards, since we're doing comparison aspects, this is a reasonable measure that there's no change in the invertebrate activity since the amount of detritus that's in there isn't going to change based on the treatment that we provide. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Respiration.
Right, cellular respiration, but if we just have a bunch of decomposers dealing with the stuff we just killed versus the natural microbiota, there is a difference, and they're both performing cellular respiration. So I'm just wondering if there's any way to delve into that, but it seems like there's not.
That's a good question, and I inherited this project to do, and so I wanted how I could interpret it. And I looked as much as I could in the literature about that, and there's certainly a mixture of those things there. Again, I'd have to say, since we don't see a significant change, it probably means that there's no significant change in the invertebrate activity, since nothing else changed.
Right, because we actually asked for a pre-monitoring, an assessment.
A baseline.
Of course,
Yeah.
So it doesn't sound as though baseline was really.
Yes, it was.
Oh,
It was, yeah, and that's what they're saying. It wasn't a difference.
Pre-treatment and
Yeah.
the graph that I put in the report shows some minor changes, both up and down, mostly. But ultimately, I didn't see any changes that would indicate a major concern. I was also worried about several factors. One of which is that there's a seasonal change and temperature change, which could affect this. However, I did the test at room temperature after allowing it to equilibrate to room temperature, so that hopefully would make a difference. But there could be a seasonal change in the invertebrate viability within the soil samples that I took, even in the 1 month segment that we had, the 2 week segment that we had between. And if you look at what you'd expect in the soils at ambient temperature, the change between August and September to October and November is dramatic. I mean, there's a curve that goes like this. So I was actually pleased that we didn't see a drop off, because I would have had to say, maybe that's because of the season, but we did not see a seasonal change.
Well, because plants are going to use some of the CO2 as well.
I mean, if you want to question the use of the CO2 as a measure, I don't particularly disagree with you, but it was chosen and approved as a measure, and the fact that there wasn't a visible change or measurable change is encouraging, at least.
I don't think I signed on to this one, so I'm fully going to question the CO2 as our standard.
Yeah, we might want to look at that in the future.
Yeah.
Because I think our intent would have been more to look at the
Individual.
the small invertebrate
diversity.
animals,
Yeah.
not necessarily bacteria, because this could all be bacteria and fungi.
Right, they're just digesting what
Yeah.
is going dormant for the season, et cetera, when we're looking at late October, November.
Do you happen to know how much, what volume of glyphosate that was actually used?
The volume of what?
The glyphosate, how much glyphosate was actually used?
I don't know that.
No, and I didn't see it here, unless I missed it. It's quite possible.
I think it was in the proposal, I think.
Yeah.
No, I was only like 3 or 4
Yeah, it
gallons.
was
Well, when I
small.
went out there, they had probably 200 or 300 gallons in the support.
And the Marsh Master?
In the
No,
unit?
in the actual support vehicle. And
Oh,
so
concentrate?
yeah, so I was really puzzled.
Well, they're required, I mean, every year, you're required, you know, as a licensed applicator, I have to fill out a form that tells how much I used
Right,
and what I used it on, so
Yeah.
that data should have been collected.
right. I was just
we can
curious. There
ask.
seemed
Yeah.
to be so much more that they
Yeah.
brought over and they said they were going to use.
Right, it was like they're gonna use a gallon or a mile or something. It,
I,
the,
It's not listed in the report. I don't know. I'm sorry.
I definitely
Stuff of legend.
am concerned about drawing any conclusions from any of this invertebrate sampling, especially this post-treatment that wasn't able to be done because of boat access.
And that's in the water, the water.
Water treatment plant, yeah.
Right, but next time you sample, it's not gonna be at all relative unless you're sampling again after a treatment, you know? Those populations would have had potential to rebound.
So I would suggest that if it's rebounded well by the spring, that probably is reasonable data to say this isn't such a harmful thing.
No, it's
But,
too long
tell us
because
more.
you already would have broken down the glyphosate into formaldehydes and things that are in the soil, so you really can't draw anything from that.
So I understand, but in terms of a conclusion to make on the safety of the program, and again, I'm here only as a reporter, but would a temporary drop in the invertebrate sampling with a full recovery within a reasonable period of time be reason not to do it?
Well, I think that's a good question. That's a good question. I mean, it sounds.
I think that's a question that, I mean, with any of these projects, I mean, taking a snapshot from one around the same thing, projecting is something that
Yeah, that's-
difficult to do, that you're trying to gain information, so when you're put to make a decision for the next project, you have more information and better information.
We do have baseline, relatively speaking. We have, you do have an area though that was not treated as used as a control. So you can always check against your controls and you can go back.
I guess I was just concerned when this was presented to us that the sampling monitoring was not solid enough to make this go forward. And the Pond Coalition didn't seem to think during that presentation that the monitoring was as important as maybe I feel. And then when I look at the fact that they were not able to take these invertebrate samples, Jeff, was that something your office was called about, that, hey, we can't take this sample, we've reached a problem? Like, was there a way to remedy this at the time that wasn't taken?
Well, I'd say from our end, some of the stuff that came in, it wasn't realized it was an issue until after it had been processed. And that's one of the reasons why the Pond Coalition sent someone to present the report, because there were some issues, there were some problems, there were some hang-ups and some things that are there. And I think part of this is to figure out ways to make sure that it doesn't happen, or have a backup to do something that's there. And that's part of what we're at.
Right. And, you know, I appreciate you coming in and discussing this with us. So,
Well, so you know, the Pond Coalition members and the discussion we've had about the water sampling, we're close to as mad as one could get about the fact that it didn't come out the way we expected it to. Not in terms of results, but in terms of the sampling.
Right.
And there's been a lot of back and forth between the people who did it and us. And the best I can do is say we ultimately decided that we can't trust the second result. It was so far different than what the first result was that it didn't make any sense. And that actually led us to question what they did, and that's when we discovered that they hadn't used a boat and they hadn't taken the sampling the way we expected them to. So this came to light, a couple of weeks later, actually, and that's why I presented with some embarrassment, but with the understanding that we feel it's very important that we get good sampling in the spring for comparison purposes.
And it's tough for us that we take a lot of water samples from our office, and that's why we take field duplicates randomly, do things to check, because sometimes labs miss process. Someone doesn't see that they got a scoop full of sediment when they use the water trap and get it up. There's all kinds of little things that can happen. I think the important part is to recognize that there were problems, and that the projects that are the real issue with doing projects really late in the season is that if you have a problem and you want to go resample, there's been significant changes in weather and photo period by the time we come back out there. So, welcome to the world of Mars. It seems so easy to dip on us. It's not.
Well, I think there are far more people in the Conservation Commission interested in hoping that this is successful.
Well, we certainly do, and Fred Muddy's is a really miserable situation, and watching Long Pond disappear more and more rapidly, it's been very discouraging. So and I promise you I will not be biased in my presentation of data by my wish for it to succeed.
Well, in that case, we'll see you guys again in the spring. So
Yeah.
We look forward to it.
See what the effect was.
Thanks, Dr.
Thank you very much. Okay.
One comment, it's very thorough report.
Yeah. Everyone's watching it.
Very thorough.
I think they do probably the best monitoring reports from the Conservation Foundation.
Mhm.
He's had to
That's
commit
how
day
they
and a half to read it.
Okay.
Yeah, it is very good.
They get paid by the pound.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, we're done with business.
So all done with that. So other business. Approval of minutes. Anybody have any comments on the minutes? If not, approved by unanimous consent. And enforcement actions, we've already did.
Oh, no. We have more.
No,
Merry Christmas.
no, I didn't mean we had already looked at one.
One for each.
I heard the warning the other day. This might
But we
be.
did. So I guess we'll start, I'll pass pictures, and I would like these back, if I can get them back, of 84 Baxter Road. This is a project that we permitted for kind of house renovation and place and some landscaping. The pictures you're going to see don't look like there's much. It's a site that was very tight, and a lot of the areas point right up to the wetland that you can kind of see in there. The most troubling piece of what's there is, I'm still trying to track down, when you look at the pictures, you'll see a white, looks like a white venting pipe of some kind that's in the landscaping. I'm not sure what it's for, because it doesn't look like a typical roof drain. I mean, it's literally like a 90-degree elbow that comes out of the ground into space. And I can't figure out what it's for because there's no septic system. So I'm not sure what that's for. The more troubling piece is the shed that you see in the last picture was constructed without a permit. And I say it, and I bring it up because if you remember the first hearing that we had for it, the original plan they wanted to put forward had the shed. And they specifically removed the shed because they were told they were not going to get waivers for a new structure, and then it was built. So I'm recommending as part of the enforcement that you just enforce its removal and say, thanks for bringing it in. I wouldn't even give it an opportunity to try to permit it and deny it. I would just order it removed and be done with it. And then ask about the
Periscope.
pipe.
Periscope.
Instead of what it is.
That's like Mario goes down into those.
Just somebody
Downspouts going over?
That's weird.
Do you think
Well,
it's
I think that's maybe what it is, but it's weird because it sticks out of the ground this far. Then it gets the downspouts, the downspouts have to run, and then make a vertical turn to run.
Well, no, I mean, like the water goes in there and then use it almost like a septic where it just lets the water kind of dry out. It's not contained. You know what I mean?
They wouldn't wanna look
I'm not.
No, I haven't seen it.
When you
so
see
I'm
the
just kind of
picture, you'll look
speculating.
at it. It looks like a vent pipe from a septic system.
Right.
Just short.
Yeah, but
It's
short.
It's kind of weird. I'm not sure what
It's got this little discharge depression.
Yeah,
Oh.
that's the thing that made me curious about.
Got a smoke bomb sort of?
Interesting.
We'll
Is
see.
that a sump pump?
What do you need, Jeff, in order to?
We just need you guys to issue the enforcement to order the removal of the shed, and then to then appear before the commission to explain what happened. But I would order the shed removed first and foremost,
Yeah.
because the shed is clearly not part of their open permit. I mean, this is in violation of their
I think I
ordinance.
remember that one being
Yeah.
removed from the application.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, they pretty much got told that putting a shed inside a 25
Discharge.
wetland
Wasn't gonna happen.
Zero chance.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's
Someone
probably
like to make the
like
motion?
Is there a sump pump somewhere? It's probably a sump pump.
Removal of the shed
That was
and
my report, that was some pump, but I don't know.
It's not a lot of water.
No, I know, but I
What
mean,
is
explain the pipe.
Sump
Come
pump
in
for a
front of
4-inch
us to
pipe.
explain the pipe.
explain it.
Well, that's why I was wondering if it was like a
Second
downspout
that.
and it just
Second
came in,
that. Okay.
and then.
All right, we're gonna vote.
water's
We're gonna vote.
it's just-
Yeah,
As
so
we
we had a
just
motion
presented
for the removal of the shed and come in and explain the pipe. And we have a second? So all those in favor? All those opposed? No, passes
maybe they can
unanimously.
explain why the shed's there too.
Well, that's what I want them to appear.
I didn't
and
realize
just-
it
I
was
would really
there.
love to ask the question of,
Just
you
show
removed it from the application, what made you think you could build it?
What was confusing about what we
Yeah,
said?
like, it's part of what I would like to do. All right, and as that one's going around, to get to number 2, our Vista cutting of the week, this week, took place at 41 Shakamo Road, which if you've ever been down to 41 Shakamo Road, it is way down Rabbit Run Road, way in the moonlight. So, yeah, so the first one I'll pass around. I'll do it really quickly. So the subject parcel, and I will tell you that I know the cutting was for 41 Shakamo Road because they were kind enough to stack all of the cut cedars behind the sign that had their name and 41 Shakamo Road. It was very nice of them.
Nice.
So that being said, so I'll start these around.
Did the landscaper leave his card?
I actually, the one day I showed up, I actually saw the landscaper that was there. So I'll be
Take a
happy to tell you
selfie
guys
while he's
that it was a
doing it.
landscape company that goes by Green Planted Landscape. So they were there, and they're, you'll see, it's a dead end road. You're there for a purpose, you're not there to hang out. So I'll be the first to say, I did not physically see them cut, but if you're there and it's raining and you have tools, you're doing something, even if you're not doing something. So the subject parcel here is this one way in the back, this 41 Shakamo here. It's surrounded by NCF land, and the cutting all took place primarily up here where the coastal bank comes in and the wetland is there. So I'm pretty sure it's in the buffer zone. So the odd thing is the work took place on NCF's property. So kind of like what we do with the land bank, I already called NCF and gave them the heads up and said, hey, you're going to get hit with an enforcement order for work done on your property. If you guys accept it and you want to pursue with the neighbor, we're happy to issue it to the clear party that it benefited. Or if you guys want to handle that similar to how the land bank handles it, where they pretty much say, you can pay for it, or we're going to go to court, and they decide from there, they can sort it out. But I don't think there's any denied. There's nothing else even close to out there. I mean, it's literally the middle of nowhere out there. But it's pretty clear how much is included in the cutting. It's really hard to tell. But it's another, it was mostly cedar trees. A little bit of the brush was cut, but mostly, you can see by the size of the stumps.
Pretty good sized trees. It's like a 8
I would say the biggest one I saw was probably, I mean, not a DBH, but just a basal diameter at the bottom. The biggest one I saw was probably close to 16 to 18 inches across.
Whoa.
So it was big cedars. So,
That can be 80 to 100 years out there.
Oh, easy.
Yeah.
so also, just to get authorization on both these, the 84,
In fact, did you actually keep any, did you grab a log?
oh no, the last time I went back, the site was all picked up. I'll be the first to say, I actually got those pictures from somewhere else, so. But I also, with this enforcement order too, I'm not as concerned with the 84 Baxter Road. I mean, that isn't symptoms of a, seems to be an island-wide problem that's going on. I feel like every week coming with more vista cuttings.
Okay.
I want to issue this enforcement order, and I also kind of want your guys' permission to, with NCF's blessing and Land Bank's blessing, put them in the paper again and say, this was benefit, and I really want to run the picture with their name and address in the pile of wood.
Oh, yeah.
And say,
It's a great idea.
don't do this. Because if you do, we're coming, and then I also, right after the new year, would like to have a public hearing, because the first thing I would like to do, even in the short term, given our enforcement thing, is to quickly do a table for violations and to change the fine and adopt the fine for vista cutting and set up kind of a scale that it's like, I'm happy to go $300 per tree over 8 inches, and just say, here's your 20 tickets, you can please pay these, and be done with it, because after the land bank and Scopus Road, and now this one, they just, something is going on and people aren't getting it, and this happens to be one where I saw the landscape repair, so I can get in touch with them separately, but to me, it just has to stop. Especially because it's so poorly done too. It's just a real kicker.
If I may interrupt, I'd like to see that the fine be the value of replacing each individual tree.
Well,
Absolutely.
I would love to go that route. The problem with going that route is you cross into a criminal proceeding. Well, I can't issue criminal tickets. We'd have to, the police have to issue non-criminal, have to issue criminal citations. So
Is that
$300 is the max, but that's why if you set the violation to be something that, if there was a clear thing to say that if the tree at the stump is bigger than 8 inches, it's $300, and you stack them up. It'd be a lot of paperwork to write out 30 tickets, but you can certainly do it.
Well,
You'll be hearing from the
there
Globe.
is actually a body of law developed
Oh, yeah.
over this, because
You know
my
what it
brother
is.
had some trees cut down
Oh,
by
yeah.
someone, and so
Brutal.
That's kind of one of the reasons why I want to do it too.
Okay, just let me know, get your statement.
Yeah. No. But it's one, and if you look at the aerial photograph, I mean, there's a lot of encroachment onto NCF's property, and when
Yeah.
And when is
took a look at it.
NCF going to say criminal trespassing?
Well, that's why before I do it, I'm going to coordinate it with NCF, because I certainly don't want to mess up any proceedings that they are planning to do. My guess is the people that are involved probably don't want to make the paper and do that at all costs. So,
So what do you want from us then?
an enforcement order.
Okay, so
Okay, should we issue an enforcement order for what's the address?
Well, the address here, it's actually an unnumbered parcel on Shakopee Road. But if you just put it for the NCF parcel on Shakopee Road, I can do it.
So moved.
second, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Good. Good.
Eventually, people are going to figure out that doing this isn't a good idea. But
Will they though?
I like the newspaper though. Okay.
it's a landscape or something. Yeah, as soon as I saw the address and the name, I was like, so.
Okay, reports, Mr. Chairman?
Are we done with?
Yeah, we're done with the point.
Okay, yes, now on to reports. CPC, I see we have.
So everyone has a handout.
Yep.
Represents Lawson's work, 5 each pages, and 40 hours of hashing out different opinions on the subject. So there you have it, taxpayers' money and what it's going to be spent on. And on page 3, the one that really impacts us is Preservation Institute of Nantucket. About the full amount that they're asking for doing razor screening.
Oh, yeah, you mentioned that.
historic interiors of houses is liaising with Bayfront Zoo. They're looking for state money to do as much as possible. Happy to answer any questions at any point.
So this is what they're asking for, not what they're,
No, this is what we get.
this is what you're getting.
This is what you settled, this is the
Very good.
final.
Yeah, because everybody on the committee felt that it was important. The islands start to deal with sea level rise.
Yeah. But that's a good 400,000 to affordable housing, that's good.
Well, yes, and also, in fact, Canberra Surface Wet on a letter asking them to start calling out more money for affordable housing. Saying that they're trying to set, an example.
Yep. Cool.
Well, you sprinkled some money around for other affordable housing issues, subject to Habitat Humanity, you guys spent some money there. And,
Yep.
Right.
infrastructure of Stations Path, which we know is an affordable housing
Yeah, it's actually quite a big number.
project.
Yeah.
The housing Nantucket has got over $1 million of funds that they have, allocations that they haven't spent. And so this was sort of a gripe on their knuckles.
Yes, shake it loose.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that, yeah.
The Stations Path infrastructure should include dog waste disposal. Well, it's something that we're not thinking about. When we do these developments, we're not saying everybody has a dog and they're pooping on the ground and it's not being picked up. And that impacts water quality, impacts our streets, and there has been a significant increase of dog waste. And not even that many people are in there. And there's not one trash can on those streets to dispose of it outside. So that's something that impacts, our resources in the waterways.
Well, I think education would be
Yeah.
a good idea. We do actually, where I am in town, we have a lot of dog walkers, and I'm glad to say they all carry a little bag with them. So.
And if
Oh, yeah.
there's disposal
Well,
areas,
the whole
we
thing
want
with
to
people
pick it up.
people using the little, it kills me when you get out on these walking trails and then there's
Piles of
the
plastic.
bag
Yes.
on the ground. It's like, I took the time to put it in the bag, but I'm not taking the
You
bag.
didn't give me anywhere to dispose of it.
So I'm
So
gonna
you
leave
aren't
it.
going to bring
You
it.
just rather them leave the poop.
I know.
You're better off
So
to
now
leave
it's
it
sealed
there.
and then.
Now it's sealed in a bag,
The
it'll
bag
take
will last
longer to
forever.
degrade.
The ones that get me are the ones where we actually put the dispensers in the bags and people will tie the used bags to them or put them
Yeah.
in the dispenser. It's
At the
Oh.
cemetery, and the woman was like literally across the street of like a path, and I'm like, bags right there. It's just like, oh, okay, then off you went.
thanks for coming.
Oh, God. Okay. Well, good work, Ian.
That's pretty impressive, Ian.
Well, it's a good group.
Yeah.
Got a big list, didn't you, this
Stay
year?
on for another year.
So moved.
That's right. At least, you got to hear that one.
You're gonna get voted back in.
MPEDC, I was really pleasantly surprised with a picture of the Sconset Bluff in our packet. They are back. And they are going to hire a consultant to look into locations, offshore locations for sand for their project, realizing the cost of sand in the island is getting a little steep. And now they're concerned of depleting the island's sand.
Yeah,
Which
they're
is nice of
looking
them.
for an awful lot of sand.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'm not sure how involved they're gonna get. Whether or not we're gonna see a whole bunch of stuff, some offshore data, or if they're gonna look into whatever existing information. But,
Well, there's a ton of stuff they presented in 2006 and 2007.
well, yeah, not one of the very close location for sure,
And I
for sure.
think we should remember how wrong they were when they
Yeah.
went out there and looked and what they missed. I mean,
No kidding.
The good news now is there's also, and it's gonna come back, I'll send everyone a link to it, the State Ocean Management Plan that's kicking around.
Yeah.
Identifies areas, has pre-identified areas 4 possible borrow sites that they've done some work on. So it'd be interesting to see how the sites they're thinking about, if they overlay on those, because it would certainly save them a lot of headaches if they would go to the pre-approved areas.
Where are they? Are they anywhere near the site?
There aren't many last time I
They're
heard.
pretty far.
And then that's something, since they're taking essentially a public resource, that they would pay the state of Massachusetts for?
That is, for those permits, that is something that would be negotiated with the Commonwealth.
Well, I'm sure.
For rights to mine the area.
Yeah.
And we have jurisdiction out to 3 miles, is that correct?
All bodies, all Commonwealth, just out to 3.
Beyond the fence.
Beyond 3 is the feds.
Yeah, but
We got a
as-
rude lesson in that one, but then,
3.1. Yeah, I mean, they did mention they do understand the shellfish issues. So, yeah, they may go beyond.
Isn't it cheaper to move the house?
Yes,
There's an idea.
but there's money to be made in sand mining.
And there's money to be
Well, I mean,
made.
there's definitely people sitting out there waiting, not just us, you know, open up that opportunity. So I don't, any other reports? No mosquitoes. Nope.
No mosquitoes,
No.
we still need, I don't really wanna step up as chair, we need someone to apply to the mosquito control commission. I approached some members of, I can't think of the organization's name, like the Nantucket bee people.
Oh, yeah.
To see if any of them were interested. Again, if you guys have any ideas.
Okay. Oh, actually, I forgot to also mention, I guess I was so shocked to see the NPDC. I did mention at the NPDC meeting our concern of the connecting of houses to the storm lines. And it turns out that you had that discussion the same day.
was yours as much of a lead balloon as mine?
Well, no, I think there was a considerate listening. But then, you know, and then when I mentioned, you know, contaminants downtown and stuff, that got a good laugh. So I think the attitude of a lot of people is just sort of like, it's there, what else, what can we do about it? But it sounds like, you know, they may come up with some ideas, the town will come up with some ideas for filtration similar to the yacht club. So we'll see what comes of it.
Definitely, I think that speaks to a lot of what Steve Henry was talking about tonight. Is not that I'm trying to expand your scope of reach, and that we were busy enough, but really dealing with filings against the Wetlands Protection Act is really about a third to half of what you guys in jurisdiction are tasked with doing. It's always what you've been tasked with doing, and managing the open space of Nantucket is something that falls underneath this board, and it's just something that, looking more at it, it's something that the board has never exercised before. I'm not saying that, you know, you gotta come out, you know, take the boxing gloves off and just start, you know, being bullies, but it's something that, to me, it's coming to a time, kind of post-Mattocket sewer vote, where someone needs to take a leadership role in making decisions to help water quality here. And the Board of Health has a certain reach, and you guys have a certain reach, and planning has a certain reach. And if one of those three isn't keeping up their end of that check and balance, it can get skewed one way. I think that's what we've seen. And now it may be a time to say, hey, these are the goals and objectives of the Concom, and this is what our expectation is to come into our projects. If you want to do a project in one of our jurisdictional areas, you have to do it this way. And then put them to the test. I mean,
Do we need to write regs then, or we have to add some regulations to do
probably.
that?
Some of them may actually take a bylaw change, so, but that's something that'll be kind of a year-long project. But certainly adopting new performance standards for regulations to say if on-site, you know, surface water runoff needs to be contemplated, or roof runoff, it needs to be infiltrated through an area that provides some level of pre-treatment, whether it's through the use of plants or alternative methods. That's what's required. And you take that decision away from people and say, this is the best way to do it. This is how we're going to do it. So we've always been kind of passive about it, but we clearly see, you go to meetings and you talk about contaminants on roadways and things like that, and you get a snicker and a eye roll.
Right, I didn't even bring up, atmospheric nitrogen. I felt that was gonna
Too much science.
turn them right over. Yeah. No, that was very behaved. But, yeah, so, I mean, and Cora actually had mentioned that they were looking to sort of develop a board dealing with the stormwater
Well, in the,
design and just sort of,
so in the meeting that's going on downstairs right now,
Oh.
one of the components to the budget that's being presented that was put in is the development of a townwide stormwater management plan.
Yeah.
I think that's something that's hugely important missing, because it's a big piece of what would be the CWMP that's never been done. But I also think it's something that, given the timing of everything, there's some personnel changes coming in the town that everyone knows about, things that are there, that it's really a time for, just speak for my office, and for my department to, put its hat in the ring and say, this is what we expect for our stormwater management for water quality purposes. And it's, we'll probably come to your other spots to say, this is what we think is important. And, maybe it's time for us to adjust what our standards are and take a hard look at it. Instead of being told that, well, it has to be paved because it needs to be paved. And we can say, well, it's great, it's going to be paved, but that runoff is going to go into a biofiltration area and get rid of all of the, the issues that we have, or at least mitigate some of them. And if they say, well, we don't want that, we'll say, well, you're not getting a permit. Sorry.
Yeah.
Have a nice day. I mean, it's stuff that if you're not going to get compromises between boards, you just have to say, well, we know we're not going to win this battle, so we're going to win the one on the side that you guys can't do anything about.
We gotta get ahead of the planning board on a lot of this stuff.
Well, it's not necessarily get ahead of them. We need to get ahead of them and then say, it's so much easier to just work together.
Yeah, I know.
Instead of having us and them as the building.
You're right. Yeah, so, okay.
That's a little spirited MP needs.
Yeah, no kidding.
Oh, is this, yeah, it's interesting. Commissioner comments?
Yeah, I have one. After you.
I was contacted by Coastal Conservancy in Deanne Atherton about the bluff and the potential trigger of failure criteria,
Oh, yeah.
and I just didn't know
All right.
if you had heard from
So-
her as well.
We just got late today, their first full monetary report arrived. So that you guys
Real Christmas.
happy holidays, everyone. The thing that goes with it is there's a condition in there that they need to provide regular updates, like every 6 months, on the status of the relocation of Baxter Road. And to date, that has not happened.
Is this the town or SBPF? Because isn't the
Town.
town supposed to?
They are both,
Yeah.
they are both
together.
responsible for that update.
Right.
So, both the town and SPPF are kind of on the hook for that report. I'll be honest, I haven't really read the full report yet, because they were busy today, but, we'll all see what's in there. And then, I'll probably go through condition by condition and see what we're looking for, if at least it was attempted to be met, and then if there's more information that needs to come out of it, I'll probably say that, and we'll send it off to get reviewed. CZM has kind of agreed to review it too, as another government agency. Looks like I'm gonna have to switch my coastal geologist that I was going to use to review it. I asked Jim Holland today when I spoke to him on the phone at the UF one, and he goes, well, the two I use are two firms that are already involved with the project. So, maybe I'm looking to scramble to find one, but between me, DEP, and CZM all looking for one, we should hopefully find one by the end of the week that wants to take a look at it. But I think someone, when they got the report, saw got a week in the knees, decided that over Christmas they didn't want to spend it like that. So, we'll see. We are actively scouring. So that will go up tomorrow. I keep the list of everyone who was involved in the hearing before. I'll email a link to everybody. You guys will just get it direct, and then we'll send a link to. It'll be up step right from the start. And then that will trigger, I'll put in that email, that will trigger that 4-week review period that we talked about, and I'll look into what 4 weeks is after their submission to schedule that special hearing that we talked about again presented.
And send a link to the zoning for offshore mining.
Yes, I will send the link to those.
Do they get contacted about not meeting that criteria?
Oh, they already did contacted about not meeting that criteria.
So the criteria is that they didn't have the 6-month report on the Baxter Road
Relocation, correct.
relocation.
This is all part of the whole emergency, purpose for the emergency order. Yeah.
Well, Andrew House has already said that he has no intention, we have no business interfering with the road.
Yeah, I've heard that. Heard that a couple times. Ian, did you have?
I'm sure there's other things that there'll be questions about. I have no doubt that there's one. But that's the one that has kind of jumped off the page. I will also say too, we haven't really experienced any really significant storm events since that thing was installed. So it's either the luckiest thing ever, or
Yeah, no kidding, man.
It did climate change. I think that was climate change. They built that thing and changed the climate.
Did you have any comments?
Well, I do.
These guys are like, how about the door?
I was surprised that in the article about the Nantucket sewer, that long runoff wasn't mentioned. Everything else, including seagull shit, they made the article. There's absolutely nothing.
That's Andy's.
Yeah. Oh, that's okay.
I
It's
have as
just-
many copies of it.
yeah, we all got that picture. Is like getting old.
I read it twice.
Okay.
Yeah. And I thought that
You can have it. Oh, please take it. Get a little PowerPoint thing they sent.
Real quick before
Okay.
we leave.
Wait, I have one quick one too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just talking about nitrogen in the harbor, I asked Caitlin
Sit down.
what the surface area of the harbor was, and it's like 5,250 acres. And if you look at not quite 2 pounds of nitrogen atmospheric deposition per acre, that's over 9,000 pounds, almost 5 tons of nitrogen coming from the atmosphere into the harbor every year. And if I remember right, based on some reports we had in the fertilizer committee, that's over half of the annual input of nitrogen into the harbor from all sources.
Wow.
A little over half of it is atmospheric deposition. And the rest of it is street runoff, and then the 2 other big ones are lawn, fertilizer, and septic.
Well, actually, to be fair, the percentage that we use for the most part for atmospheric deposition was almost up to 70%.
Wow.
Comes from atmospheric deposition, and then the rest, because it's really between, depending on your abatement, between 20 and 30% of things that we actually have the ability to alter the inputs of, and then it breaks down from there, water body to water body.
But nonetheless, there was a flourishing shellfish industry 50 years ago, and the atmospheric deposition was nearly identical.
Oh, no, atmospheric deposition has actually gone up significantly from
Yeah.
a lot of burning of fossil fuels and stuff within the atmosphere.
Well, it's gone from 280 parts per million to 300 in terms of CO2 over the last.
Well, this is
25 years.
nitrogen.
I understand.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing, so, but, all right. I
But
will-
it's-
I will report that.
Well, it's a thing that happens, and this is a problem we run into a lot, so is,
It hasn't increased by that much.
one thing is, it doesn't seem like it, but when you do it over the volume, it's a lot.
It's a lot. Yeah.
And that's what people get hung up on, and that's why I have been pitching the town for years to change how we present the total daily maximum load. Because we present it in this phony baloney milligrams per liter.
Yeah.
And you see where we're at, and we're, at 0.368, and we're trying to get to 0.350. And you're trying to convince people that spending $40 million to move a 0.015 is a really good investment. But when you do the math and you put it into actual weight, you're talking about removing tons of nitrogen. Yeah, and that's the problem is you use the easy numbers for science. So using milligrams per liter because they're really easy to work with. But they're really
It doesn't get the,
they're hard to understand.
Yeah.
And I had said to someone, jokingly, I said, if you took a big pile of sand and you piled it up somewhere in the middle of town and said, this is how much nitrogen is going into the harbor every year.
Yeah.
And if we go to this, this pile will go away, people will go, wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
This many bags of
Yeah,
fertilizer.
you know, like you said, if you put the atmospheric deposition in, you put down, 5 tons of material in one spot, it's like that's the nitrogen that goes into the harbor.
Yeah.
It could be a lot.
It'd be a lot, yeah. The thing is, though, what we don't really know is there, often in things like this, there's a threshold where, the harbor can stand this much nitrogen and this much nitrogen and this much nitrogen, but when you get to this much nitrogen, that could do it,
So we could actually calculate that from 50 years ago, using the figures for nitrogen deposition 50 years ago.
Well, or
when there
we
were
need to look
300
at total
people.
nitrogen in the harbor, really.
And I think we've got to look at probably, I don't know, there's got to be a component of accumulation too, no?
Yeah, well, it gets in the bottoms, because one of the sources was prop wash on the bottom, bringing up bottom sediments would release a lot of nitrogen into
So
those.
since
But that's
the
not
50s,
new nitrogen.
Well, I'm no longer, powerboating in the harbor, so that's removed the major
Thank
source.
God. Right, you were a powerboater.
All right, unless
Run
the
aground.
this is a good segue. So, just to kind of keep you guys abreast of what's going on in other natural resources world and stuff that's important. This past Monday, I traveled with a good group of charter boat fishermen down to the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Council meeting in Baltimore, Maryland. And what we were there to support was the inclusion of looking into the possibility of an area closure for small mesh dragging for squid south of the island. So for the first 6 miles off the island, and then the 12, obviously the first 3 are governed by the state, so the kind of that last 3, and then another 6 in 10-minute squares there. And we were petitioning them essentially to say, you guys need to look into this because they are so efficiently fishing that they're destroying our recreational fisheries and our other fisheries like striped bass and fluke and things where people are just not catching fish anymore behind Martha's Vineyard in Nantucket. And I think the best example that stuck with me is Martha's Vineyard has a 5-week striped bass fishing tournament that striped bass derby at Martha's Vineyard. And last year they had 4,000 entrants. And the tournament goes for 5 weeks. And in 5 weeks, 4,000 entrants caught 121 striped bass. Wow. That's it. And you talk to the guys, just talk to Pete or Bobby or Tom Lesko or any of those guys, and they talk about, I could have caught 121 striped bass in 3 or 4 days off the South Shore 10 years ago. And the real big change in the last really 3 to 5 years, the squid fishery has gotten really hot, and the price of squid is really high. And they drag the bottom through an area of essential fish habitat where squid are known to spawn and put their squid moms down. So we asked the Mid-Atlantic Fisheries Council, which is the regulatory agency for federal waters, to include this looking into a amendment to, it was a capacity amendment for squid. And in no uncertain terms, they pretty much told us to pack our stuff up and go home. To the point of we went down and we were all asking to speak at the hearing, and Tobias spoke, Bobby spoke, and then a gentleman that had come with us from Falmouth spoke, and they declined to take comment from me, Pete Kaiser, Tom Olesko, Ken Gamble, a couple of other attorneys that we had with us, and they pretty much said, thanks for coming, enjoy your trip back to Nantucket. So what that's kind of led us to is tomorrow there's a meeting that the state is having about a similar issue within the 3-mile line and inclusion, but it's something that we've started to take a lot more active role in kind of monitoring what's happening to our waters that are not necessarily within our jurisdiction, but the habitat that affects the areas that are around the island. And what we're doing tomorrow, I actually won't be there, but we were petitioning the State Division of Marine Fisheries to come and hold a public hearing on this very issue on Nantucket. And they've already kind of agreed to do it. What we're going to be trying to do shortly is really unite everybody that we can to say we're protecting habitat for spawning squid, which are the primary forage food for all of the fish around Nantucket, not just bass and bluefish and tuna that we all like to catch, but everything around Nantucket, and that not doing the analysis and not doing the research to know whether you're having a significant impact or not, and just saying, well, we keep catching more and more every year and it doesn't go down, so we're clearly not doing anything bad, is not proper stewardship of a resource, because that's the argument we heard on Monday, and their comments were a bunch of stories from local recreational fishermen that aren't catching fish anymore isn't enough to say that the industry's having a negative impact on the habitat of the fishery. And they don't want to do the analysis because I honestly think they know what the analysis is going to show, and it's going to show that they're having a serious impact.
And they don't want to deal with the crashing.
No, well, that's the thing, is it's a board that's dominated by commercial fishing industry, and that's, technically, squid last year peaked out at $2.20 a pound, to give you kind of an estimate on what we looked at. So when you guys drove on the South Shore in May and June, which is the second trimester for catching fish, there's a quota of 8 million pounds in that trimester.
Squid or fish?
Just squid. And you can roll over from trimester to trimester. Last year in trimester 2, in the area between Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard, they caught 18 million pounds.
Holy cow.
So they threw in 10 million pounds?
They caught an additional 10 million pounds of quota because they rolled over some from the first trimester. But what they're doing is they're going and they are catching all of the aggregating squid in spawning habitat because they're all grouping together to reproduce.
So that's
they're
brilliant.
Crushing it. I mean, it's super efficient.
Yeah.
I give them credit for figuring it out, but it's
creepy.
It's something that's not. It's not a sustainable way to fish. And what we're trying to do is to push, and we're trying to even say what we're really looking to get is, the community to kind of step up, and when there's a public hearing, to not get 50 people or 100 people, get a few hundred people to show up and say, this is important, and to have, and I actually said I was talking to Ashley specifically about it, to, have high school students say that it's, it's our future, this is something that we're looking into, this is something that we want to participate in, and you're taking that away. And,
well, if I may just interject something that seems to be happening on the other side of the Atlantic, and there was an article in the English paper, The Guardian, last week, about the cod has become so scarce that they're talking about, will the British take to squid and chips? So, and it wasn't tongue-in-cheek, it was a serious article. So.
No, but it's something that the thing that's concerning, and the thing that kind of sunk me other than the vineyard fishing thing is when I hear guys like Pete and Bobby and the guys that fish every day for a living say that they haven't seen a juvenile squid in over 4 years.
Weird.
Even cutting open fish, they have not seen one. It's a serious problem.
It's something maybe worth contacting. I know Maryland just had some big hearings about Manhattan. And the harvesting of Manhattan, and they're as well a food source for striped bass, and it's harvested in a similar way. I think they actually need some.
They're banned, though.
Well, that's the thing. The nice thing that we did walk away from, I don't want to make it sound like it was all doom and gloom. We did get them to keep the alternative.
Yeah, it's same situation. Totally. Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm not discussing.
That they couldn't roll over and roll into.
It's a creepy story.
So that the incidental catch that they had, so the incidental catch limit was if you were out targeting fluke or butterfish or mackerel or whatever you're trying to get, you could take 2,500 or 5,000 pounds of squid per trip, which totaled up to be 4 million of the pounds that showed up over the quota as incidental catch, because guys were just going out and targeting squid to that limit because it was selling for $2.20 a pound. That cap, that alternative that's stated is to reduce that cap from 2,500 and 5,000 to 250 and 500. So it's a significant gain in the not being able to, for trimester 2 to be the one trimester with a hard cap, and for trimester 1 to roll to trimester 3, so you're not messing with the spawning window, was really good and was a good step. But
what's true? Sorry, Jeff.
I think our concern is there's just such a concentrated effort of fishing on the essential fish habitat that's there that no one seems to be looking into is the part that's concerning. And then when you hear that during trimester 2, the amount of observer coverage monitoring those boats was less than 7%. That there's no one watching.
Yeah.
And of course the guys report like, oh, it was great. Just clean squid, no problems. And they make it sound great because no one is paying attention. Or they're taking their information when the guys are docked and have unloaded or are in the process of doing it, and they're like, 25,000 pounds right on the nose. And you're like, no, it's not true. I mean, there's no check to it. So it's just something that's coming. So it may be something that we're asking you guys to maybe sign a letter of support for at least looking into whether we should be protecting that area or not.
Well, since we have land under the ocean regulations, can we control fishing draggers that are destroying land under the ocean? Or is that one of those things that's...
But I don't think we would get very far, and I think the state would probably call and say,
Yeah, it's like agriculture where they say basically, this is our gig, not yours.
Pretty much.
What's driving the squid market?
What's that?
What is driving this?
Declining.
What?
Declining stocks in other spots and increased demand.
But what's increasing? What's the demand increase?
The demand is in the Far East, China and Japan.
So it's didn't
have
ship
fish
that.
their squid fishery down real low, and they can't meet the demands that they have for squid, for calamari, for eating.
Right.
The other big one too, the thing that's frightening, is we were talking to Jim Sherland about it, and he fishes his boat in Alaska. He fishes that big fishing boat. All of their bait, the squid that they use for bait, they fly in from Rhode Island because they catch it here because it's so easy and the demand is so high because it's such good bait. People eat it. I mean, the fact that it's a funky little mollusk that doesn't really do much. It's just part of the food chain. But the fact that it sells for $2.20 a pound and you're catching that much is crazy. It's crazy money, and that's what it comes down to.
That's all it is. Yeah, it's like fish.
And that's the thing is, at some point it may totally shift. 3 years from now, the price may be 20 cents a pound, and no one's fishing for it, and no one cares.
Yeah.
But it's going to come out like all fisheries do. I just don't. Our concern that we have is I don't want to see us get into a situation like we've gotten into with cod and striped bass, where you're waiting for years and years and years to show any signs of rebounding.
If it gets so low, it can't hardly. I mean, all the
and that's the problem. Is
ones are gone.
This isn't a species that you can afford to let it go down and rebound because it's the food for everything.
Can we connect with the vineyard and other counties?
Well, that's what we're trying to get the Cape and the islands together because the rest of coastal Massachusetts has a protection around it for this very specific thing. But you get down around Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket, where a lot of the Cape fishermen come down to fish too, and that protection is mysteriously not there. And no one knows why it happened or what it is, but it's gone. It's pretty wild. It's pretty light though. It's pretty cool to go to a federal regulation hearing because it's crazy. It's just so puppeted from things, and they're not even clever about trying to hide it. Is they're just like the fact that you got guys that own squid boats that are voting on these things, and they're like, I know I'm in conflict, but there's nothing anyone can do about it. This is an appointed board. I got appointed by the governor. I vote for commercial fishing. And there's no recourse. Or, like, I mean, you had to sit off a Madigan Marine because you're in the water. That they're like, I'm going to go fish after this meeting. I'm going to go catch $1 million worth of fish. It's crazy. And they did other regulations to knock out little fishermen from their fishery. I mean, it's crazy. It's
pretty sick.
Corrupt.
It's a very next
No wonder
level
all
kind
the
of
fish are
government.
going extinct and we're running out of fish.
Another reason why is
The investor doesn't care, they just worry about
the
today.
historical data that they were basing it on from the 1930s to the 1950s are in fact represent a fishery that was fished out by the 1870s. In other words, if they actually base it on what was here in the 1600s, you know, and then they wonder why the stocks are taking so long to recover because in fact they're just, you know, they're a percentage, a minimal percentage of what they were 300, 400 years ago.
I just wonder what the avenues are to regulate it.
Well, we've gone as far as
You start with the
potentially.
fishery, but do you go to trade? Do you go to I mean, are there other avenues to explore?
We think our best avenue at this point, to be perfectly frank, is actually getting congressional approval to close the area.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
that's what it is. And the beauty of being on Nantucket is it's funny to listen to them coming back with commercial guys, and they're like, well, you know, I took Kerry and his staff out last year and got his number so I could call him. And
Yeah.
just the list of guys that those guys have built
Yeah.
out that they take fishing and have relationships with, you're like, they're nothing short. I mean, the one guy was like, one of the guys on the boat with us goes, well, Donald Trump Jr. comes out to fish striped bass out of the vineyard every year with the same guys. And he's like, I can make a phone call to him in 10 minutes and say, hey, our fishing is dying here where you like to fish the most because these guys are fishing. Call me Pops. And it's crazy that it works like that.
And don't forget Nantucket.
Oh yeah, and then Nantucket
That's how the
is,
world works, you know, it's all scratch who's
well, it's
back,
one of those
you know?
things. I mean, it's to the point now where the commercial fishing guys here, the charter guys, are talking about setting up a nonprofit to help kind of further these interests along for protecting these areas. And within a matter of 6 hours, it seems like they were already funded to the tune of between $250,000 and $500,000 without even trying. It's insane. Nowhere else in the world does that happen. But here it's just like, I mean, for phone calls.
Yeah.
So stay tuned.
That's
and
encouraging.
tell people to start keeping an eye out for when that's coming. If they like
Oh,
to fish,
fine.
or they like to know people that
Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Yep.
All in favor? Aye.